Hey, everybody. Sorry for the little bit of delay. I was actually, for the past hour or so, I was trying to get tricky with using OBS instead of this Google Hangouts built-in system. But, it gets technically kind of challenging and you get all these snafus. So sorry, I was really close to having it all set up to go live through OBS instead of Google Hangouts. But alas, there was something I didn't quite understand. I think what it is I have to basically, this is kind of nerdy technical stuff. I won't talk about it for too long. I don't want to bore those of you who don't give a shit about this kind of thing. But it is kind of interesting, actually, like the software that you use to do all the streaming stuff. Let me get out the public chat real quick. Where are you at? It's pretty cool, like how much power you have over the stream and the cool kinds of technical things you can do to make it kind of tricky. So, like, if you've seen like the more famous streamers, they often have like, pretty tricked out watch screens. You can do things like people's comments like appear in that video itself, stuff like that. All right, I got my public chat popped out. By the way, at popular request from last time, a lot of you were getting annoyed at Nightbot for being overly repressive. So I disabled most of Nightbot's warning signs or tripwires. I disabled most of the tripwires. So now you can use as many capital letters as you want. You can type things, one after another. But please just don't be an asshole. Right now, you're lucky because I'm not, a major streamer. I'm not like famous, so there's not hundreds or thousands of people pouring into the public chat. Obviously, if it ever gets to that, I'll have to impose some sort of order. But so far, so good. There's only relatively small bunch of you. So as long as everyone's cool, we don't need to have repressive, draconian Nightbot filtering out spam. So thanks for joining me, everyone. As always, nice to see you. I'll get back on my typical tirades about stuff, but it just occurred to me I'm in the kind of like uniform that people who do media wear often from their house. You only have to look good from like the waist up, so like right now I look like a normal office bro, but all along I'm wearing workout shorts. Sometimes I'll even do media interviews without wearing anything under the waist. That's the good thing about working from home. But from the waist up, I look like I'm hard at work in my office. Yeah, that's a good question, Oswald. We're gonna have to ask Friedrich how he pronounces Uxküll. I don't know. I'm not good with German, but we'll find out. That's a very good question. I'll add it to the list. Right. So yeah, sorry for my delay. I was like 5 minutes late to start today. And just to continue that little bit of background story, I'm trying to set it up. I've been working on my OBS settings. I want to have like a really nice tricked out watch screen so you can have cool stuff pop up, like there's just lots of like all kinds of cool stuff you can do. So like you can let people write comments that appear in the screen, and also like when someone subscribes or whatever, you can make a little like pop up that says like so and so just subscribed. That kind of stuff. I want to kind of set that up and also make it look kind of like visually appealing. And also as we did in like previous streams, for those of you who were with me earlier in the week, it's pretty sweet when you can like wire in music and stuff like that. So the DJ thing that we had going in the previous streams, I haven't been able to do all of that with these conversations, because these conversations I do through like the built-in Google Hangout function. So like when you make an event on YouTube to do a live stream, you have to kind of like tell YouTube what type of event you want to do. And I had it all set up today. I spent like quite a lot of time getting it all set up to start doing these live stream conversations through OBS, so we can play music and do all that other cool shit. And I had it all set up, but I think my error was this conversation was scheduled as a Google Hangout on air. So therefore we have to follow through on this. But yeah, the point is I'm making slow but steady, and I think what will turn out to be significant improvements in the production quality to make, like, yeah, just everything run a little bit smoother and cooler. So just updating you on that. I'm close to having a slightly different setup for these conversations that I think will be more stylish and more fun and everything like that. What else? Thank you, JPEG Babes. Thank you for joining the Discord. We got a bunch of new people joining the Discord last night. Actually, a little bit of a word on that. I had a slight observation. It's not a very strong one, but I did notice, it seems to me that, like, last night when I put up the link to the Discord in the YouTube chat, the people who came in, we got like about 10 people or something all at once, which for our little group is kind of big. And I got a little bit of an impression that some of the people were really just kind of coming in to, like, have a look out of curiosity. I noticed this because they were kind of low effort. I have a little survey that you have to take to get in, just to filter out people who are, like, lazy or, you know, coming in for the wrong reasons or whatever. And a few of the people I could tell were kind of taking the piss, which, by the way, is a British expression for, like, not giving a shit, not really trying hard, not taking it seriously. And so a few people seemed to kind of take the piss on the survey. And then when they got into the Discord, their introduction and their initial kind of contributions were kind of, like, you know, not bad, but just low effort. Not everyone, by the way. A few people who joined last night are solid people who I know, and, you know, wrote some good stuff already in there. But my point is, that's just a little informal reflection I've had last night and today, which is that I think I'm not gonna put the link to the Discord in the actual public chat anymore, because it just makes it a little too easy. So I'm gonna go back to the old regime, which I think was working well, which is you have to, if you want in the Discord, you have to send me a DM on Twitter or email me. Okay. So again, just make it a little bit harder. So the only people who actually enter are the people who, like, really want to be part of it. I think at least, especially at these early stages when there's not that many people in it, I really kind of want to filter a little bit harder for people that are really keen to contribute to, like, growing a little culture from the ground up with, you know, really thoughtful, purposeful intention. So yeah, it's still open to people, but just DM me or whatever. Or you can send me an email. It's easy to find on my websites. On Goodreads, Friedrich has 10,000 books on his to-read list. Yeah, I'm really curious to talk with Friedrich, because I can tell, I think he's definitely one of those people who is just obsessed with media and books and collecting and hoarding. Because, and in a good way. I mean, it's a really good, I think, as he describes himself, it's like a biblioman. He's a bibliomaniac. And I like people like that. And also, you know, to be honest, he performs an important service, you know, all the organizing of the texts that he does and all of those YouTube videos. He does it, like, on a pretty ambitious scale. It's like, if you look through his YouTube, it's kind of impressive and fun, almost funny, how many texts from, like, the accelerationist world he's turned into little audiobooks. So he does that very diligently, and I can tell. I'm guessing that he's going to be, like, a very, you know, I don't know, persistent and dedicated person who's, like, very committed to, you know, gathering texts and stuff like that he likes, and that's cool because he makes it public. So I've appreciated that about his persona. Should I get a Goodreads profile? Okay, I'll think about that. Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to share all the books I've read and the ones I like and ones I don't like. I could think about that. I appreciate that. If that's something people would be interested in. JPEG Babes liked the initiation survey. Thanks. That's a funny username, JPEG Babes. Yeah, a lot of the Discords are low effort, you know, frog posters and memes and stuff like that. Exactly. And so I would like to do something different than that. So I don't want to be exclusive. Like, I'm not, like, trying to keep anyone out hard, but I'd rather create a few walls that lower the amount of people like that, at least at this stage. All right. So what else? It's 8:16, so we'll bring in Friedrich in about a half hour. What else? Oh yeah. So one thing is, what should I? One of the things I was setting up while I was trying to get my OBS settings all correctly wired today is my thing's all fucked up. Is I'm not sure if this works exactly, but I've been messing with Streamlabs, which is one of the tools that streamers use to add this these other functionalities that you can do cool stuff with. I think I set it up. I haven't tested this yet. I don't know if it works, but I think now if people want to, there is a way to make little donations if you want to. No pressure at all. Please don't if you there's really I don't need money or anything, but just as I'm kind of building up the infrastructure to get the stuff sorted for the long run. Yeah. So now if you want to, no pressure, seriously, no pressure. But one of the things I've set up in the past this morning was if people want to give a few bucks in money or in crypto, you can now do that through the link that I just put in the public chat. I'm not going to be harassing anyone for this sort of stuff. Like I said, I don't really need it at this point. So no pressure. I'm just working on setting up these different things. Like they take time. And the thing is that once this semester starts up, like once my teaching load gets heated up again, I'm not going to have the time to learn new things about streaming and how to set up open broadcasting system and how to mess with Streamlabs and all of these techie things. So I'm only going to be able. So I'm trying to use the summer months to kind of learn the ropes of how these things work and set them up now, so that when the semester starts, stuff will be kind of already out. So right, all right. What else? I'm very open to questions. If anyone has any questions for Friedrich, please put them in the public chat now. Last night, by the way, was really cool. The chat was really, you guys were really enthusiastic and lots of good, interesting stuff bubbling up from the public chat that really made the conversation more rich. So well done. Well done on that. It really helps me kind of host the conversation when people in the public chat are generating interesting questions and comments. I wonder where Thick Land is tonight. Thick Land was asked the same question 7 times yesterday. But yeah, Sonia was. You guys seem to be pretty into Sonia. I liked her high energy. I always like when I find people that can talk as much as I can, because it lets me just kind of sit back, and I like letting people just talk a lot. It's fun to listen to. All right. What the frick else? It's still hot as balls here in the UK, unfortunately, which is why I'm not really wearing any pants. I spent the day. I'm such a fucking wuss when it comes to heat, because in the US where I'm from on the East Coast, it gets really fucking hot in the summer, but they have air conditioning everywhere. So the UK usually has really mild summers, which is it's actually one of my favorite things about the UK. Typically, the summers are warm, but they're pretty cool. They don't get too bad at all. It's just kind of beautiful weather, especially in the South. But this summer sucks. They've been having a heat wave, and which it doesn't actually get as hot as it is in the US in the summer. But here in the UK, almost nowhere has air conditioning except a few chains. So the past 2 days, I just go to Starbucks all day. Today, the main thing I was working on today was trying to finish up this transcript of the Nick Land podcast. We've had multiple people help with it. Shout out to Akira. Shout out to Lua on Twitter. Shout out to Gullfire, if you're in the chat. Gullfire, also known as Jim Jones Fan Society on Twitter. Shout out to Uriello. Mad people helped transcribe that beast of a 3-hour podcast. So we have this super long text document of the entire podcast that it's almost done. It's basically almost done. It just needs like one final look over, and then we're going to post it to vastabrupt.com. How difficult? Oh, why no AC? You just stick it in your window. Yeah, I guess we could buy one, but it doesn't get hot enough frequently enough to justify that, really. It's a good point, though. We could if we wanted to. How difficult is it to get guys like Nick Land and Kantbot? Depends. People are unpredictable. Generally, yeah, it's like the more like well-known someone is, the harder it is generally to get them to do something. But you really just have to play the numbers. Like if you have to put in the work of sending out a lot of emails, sending out a lot of messages, and then you just, you're willing to take a large number of rejections to get, lucky with a few people or whatever. Or, it helps, I guess, like the key thing is, I guess, having some sort of, personal connection. Like, I didn't know Nick Land very well before I asked him to do the podcast, but I interacted with him a few times, so I think like if you have that kind of basis, then that's a huge help. But yeah, I've asked lots of people who just never get back to you. It's like a common thing. People are busy. People have other priorities. You just have to not take it personally and play the numbers. Just be persistent. Yeah, Kantbot, he said he would do it, but he's being a little standoffish in the DM. So if you want Kantbot on here, maybe all of you give him a little gently, give him some friendly harassment to get back to me and get on the live stream here. I actually just followed up with him today, so we'll see. Hopefully he'll, if we all nudge him enough, he'll come, I think. Are you an American expat in the UK? Yes, basically. Yeah, I'm American. I've been in the UK for 5 years now. People in the UK generally don't use AC for some reason. They usually just tough it out. Yeah, it's because it doesn't get that hot here usually. Ask Friedrich if he could do a John Michael Greer audiobook. I will. What else? What else should I ask Friedrich? Should we talk about? Anyone? I'm working at an AI firm at the moment, says JPEG Babes, as a project director, but I was originally in school for political science. That's cool. That's cool. AI is cool. Interested in how these technologies will shape the social sciences? That's a great question. Yeah, it's interesting because even like machine learning has not yet filtered into academic research in political science and the social sciences. So that there's still like a fairly traditional kind of linear regression modeling approach that is still far and away the most common approach to actual like statistical analysis in the social science. So more sophisticated, machine learning methods, which are now, taken up widely in industry, have not actually even been taken up much yet by academics. So that says to me that the uptake of things like AI in a serious way in the social sciences will be pretty slow. People will comment about AI, but mostly from a kind of theoretical perspective, an observer's kind of commentary perspective. What I would really like to see is social scientists using AI to do more sophisticated kinds of research and, research practices or whatever. But doesn't seem to be happening. Ask Frederick about True Detective. Okay. I can ask him about that. I've tried speed reading. Yeah, I've tried things like Spritz. I've tried actually all of them because I'm pretty obsessed with like efficiency. I'm pretty obsessed with intellectual, workflow type questions. And I'm always looking for ways to do things quicker. and just consume more and read more and produce more. So yeah, I'm like pretty infatuated and pretty up to date, I would say, with like the technology, like accessible consumer level technologies available for that sort of thing. And I could never get into the speed reading apps. I gave them a good try too. It just fucking hurts my brain. It's like, and I just find it hard to retain. I feel like I need to kind of scroll up and scroll down a little bit throughout reading something, or in terms of the physical page, go forward and go backward a little bit. I think in that movement up and down or left and right in the books or the, device or whatever you're reading, I need that to kind of like make the web of connections in my brain. The whole like speed reading apps, I can do it, but then when it's all done, I'm like just a little dazed. I'm like, what just happened? I might not be smart enough. I don't know. Let's see. All right, that's interesting. I've never even heard of Carroll Quigley, so I can learn a lot there. Sounds good. I live under a rock sometimes. I know. So Conspiracy World and Carroll Quigley. Look into having Mark Dial as a guest. He has a very interesting insurrectionary anarchist reading of Deleuze. Sounds good. I will duly note that in my increasing list of people to ask out. I think that Friedrich is German. Yes, I believe. But that's something that we can ask him about if you want. Cool. So Space Explorer asks, Justin, is it dangerous for you professionally to be publicly critical of academia before you officially get tenure? To be honest, I just don't really think it is dangerous. I think people overestimate the dangers of these sorts of things. First of all, also I should say I'm pretty much tenured. The British system, tenure means something, they don't really have the American version of tenure, but the British version of tenure, which is more or less the same, but it's just a little bit less formal. It's probably a little bit less secure than the British version of tenure. I'm sorry, the British version of tenure is just a little bit less secure than American tenure, but it's still mostly quite strong. I already have it, basically. In the UK, it's called being permanent. So in the UK, when you start academia, you are you go on like a probation period. And in that probation period, they can cancel your contract whenever. And then once you're out of that probationary period, you are, what's called like permanent. And I'm already permanent. So that's basically the British version of tenure. So they would have a really hard time firing me. They could do all kinds of shit to try to push me out or whatever. But no, I'm not really afraid. I don't think people care as much. Like, I'm a small fry academic. I'm a young academic. Like, I'm not important enough to matter. So whatever I say or do on the internet, like, people just don't. I just don't think anyone really cares that much. And I'm not really worried, to be honest. I guess if this sort of stuff were to get like more socially or culturally influential, people would maybe that the power conflicts with my situation in academia would change. But for now, like, I don't think anyone in academia really cares too much about me, to be honest. All right, so it's that time. It's 8:30. We're going to now invite in Mr. Friedrich. I sort of wonder if that's his real name. You have to imagine it's not, right? I won't ask him to dox himself, but curious. All right, everyone, hang tight. I'm sending him the link. Yeah, for all of you who are here for the first time, who maybe don't follow my stuff but are coming from Friedrich, now is a good time before he arrives for me to tell you, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm sure other people I have on in the future will be of equal interest to you. And also, by the way, folks, you should like this and reply. It helps with the algorithm. I'm not going to harass you to do that, but it's not a bad idea. Where are you, Mr. Friedrich? Okay. Sorry, no. I'm sending the link now. All right. Now we will await Mr. Friedrich. A few people just seem to have come in, probably because they set their clocks to comment at the time I said Mr. Friedrich should be here. So welcome any newcomers. You can see we have a lively public chat. And there is Friedrich. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, excellent. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well.
So your voice, you don't sound German.
Well, I'm a German American, so I'm one of those, the dirty dual citizens.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay, German American. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to. By the way, you can just, I'm not trying to dox you. You can ignore it or decline any question you want. So I'll just ask you questions out of curiosity, but feel free to redefine them or dodge them as you please. Are you based in Germany?
I moved from Germany back to the United States around a year and a half ago, but before that, I was living in Germany and going to university in Germany. Not like any sort of military thing, actually, in Germany. So I speak fluent German. It just doesn't show in my accent because I've lived half my life in the United States, so I don't have any sort of strong accent to speak of.
Okay, sure. Mm-hmm. I'm not doubting your German bona fides. I'm just I was half expecting a thick, medieval German accent or something like that.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid not, unfortunately.
No. That's cool. It's fun. That's why these streams are so funny. Like people never really know what they're gonna get. So yeah, thanks for agreeing to meet with me. So you're back in the States now?
Yeah. I attended university in Germany for about a year. Finished high school and then went to university, and I don't know, academia or whatever you'd like to call it, just wasn't really working out for me at the time. So I came to the United States and started working in the tech industry. Not very surprising, probably.
Okay, so you work in tech. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? I'm just curious.
Particularly with mobile devices. That's about as far as I'm willing to kind of go into it. But yeah.
Okay, cool. So should I West Coast? Mm-hmm. Should I presume?
No. Right now I'm actually in the southern part, southeast, more south central part of the United States, but I've lived in on the West Coast when I have lived in the United States most of my life. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, good to have a little bit of background. So we could start in so many different places, but how about maybe I could just ask you, how did you first tell us the story about how did you first get into the weird internet worlds that you and I kind of I guess overlap in?
Well, well, first of all, just I asked you a little while ago to change the description around, and that's just because if people were wondering that, like saw the original post and saw description NRX etc., and then saw the change, were wondering, well, is he or isn't he? I started as a libertarian. Then I eventually found NRX, quite a conventional story, really. Probably one that most people have when finding NRX. I stumbled across Mencius Moldbug's writings, then later on Lain's, just by progression, and went through that. I was in that sphere for a good solid about 2 years or so. Then I found Red Twitter and all the, Vincent and all the people associated with that, Edmund Berger, etc. And I was more or less lurking during that phase. And then towards, I guess you could say, the end of Red Twitter and the beginning of Cave Twitter is when I actually started interacting with that sphere of things. When I was in NRX, I was under a different handle. So, and I don't really like to plug that, not because I necessarily reject in any vehement way NRX views. It's just that I'm not really interested in that stuff anymore, and I don't want my handle to be associated with it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So you used to be more NRX, and now you're not really.
Yeah, I grew somewhat disaffected with it. Actually, about exactly the same time as Lain did. About the same time he abandoned. Well, I wouldn't, maybe abandoned is too strong a word, but allowed Xenosystems to just kind of be, and stopped after the whole XS comments debacle. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but it was a whole thing.
A little bit, but actually, why don't you tell us the story a little bit?
So basically, we're not sure who it was, but someone on Twitter set up an account just called Xenosystems comment section, using Lain's avatar for his profile picture, and just started posting random excerpts from the Xenosystems blog by commenters. And I guess this got to Lain in some way, and he realized that the quality of response to his blog was somewhat lackluster, I guess you could say. There are always a few very good commenters on his works, but there are also others. And I guess because of his libertarian outlook, kind of just generally for free speech, he didn't really police the comment section at all. And so it just sort of degenerated over the years. And yeah, so he more or less just abandoned it. And there was lots of fun to be had at the time, but ever since that sort of minor debacle, I guess you could say, he hasn't really returned to that particular blog.
Right. Okay.
Blog, really.
So you were also becoming disaffected with NRX at the same time. Was it for similar reasons?
Yeah, a few of my favorite NRX writers, particularly Thomas Bargas, probably never heard of him. He was a contributor to Social Matter for a while. He also, I don't know if he left or he just became disaffected and stopped writing things. Just generally, it was more, Lain and Bargas were my favorite writers in that sphere. They both were talking about similar things, just with different styles, I suppose you could say, and different expertises. And they both just sort of stopped interacting and writing particularly about things in that sphere. So I just also sort of, yeah, just, it was a slow process. It wasn't some sort of rupture where one day I was like, okay, that's it.
Right.
No more. I mean, I had NRX in my bio for quite some time. I only just changed it maybe 4 months ago or so. So it's not like some sort of radical break. It's just something I became disaffected with.
That's interesting. I want to drill down a little bit more in that. I want to hear more about why. But real quick, as an aside, you know, your story about Lain and Xenosystems comment section is, I just want to flag for people that it's actually kind of worth pausing on for a moment, because, you know, Lain gets a lot of flack for, you know, people accuse him of being racist and this sort of thing. But, you know, if you actually look closely at how he interacts with people, you know, he actually has no time for, like, you know, really nasty, stupid, violent, like racist types of people. And, you know, often you find when he, you know, he certainly, you know, in the words of Moldbug, he certainly is not allergic to, you know, certain, you know, how should we say, ideas or types of individuals that, you know, more polite, respectable people are allergic to. But generally, like, when he encounters, you know, stupid vitriol, he generally does not, you know, he certainly doesn't cultivate it. He actually has very little time for it.
Yeah,
so
he usually just ignores it. And then, you know, there's also another esoteric excess sort of thing. But there's one commenter, is actually a pretty good commenter as far as the quality went, Wagner, who would constantly accuse him of being like a leftist plant in NRX, to basically just tear apart the movement. And I mean, he's not averse to that, because in several of his excess posts from the 2014 to 2015, he more or less says that his objective is to create, he uses the, you know, fancy French term frisson to describe his objective. Basically just means, you know, kind of splintering, fractalization. That was his objective, was to create this kind of agonistic issue at the heart of NRX. And so those kinds of accusations have been flying around more or less ever since Lain got involved. But due to his sort of seminal importance to the movement with the Dark Enlightenment post, extended essay, whatever you want to call it, I don't think that's a very legitimate criticism. I don't think NRX would be NRX without Lain's contribution to it. So I don't think it's I don't think it's relevant criticism, but it's a funny thing that people constantly would come in, different people of varying in calibers would come in to his comment section all the time on Excess, accusing him of that, and on Twitter too, of course.
You're saying accusing him of racism or accusing him of being a leftist?
No,
plant?
accusing him of subverting NRX, and I mean he always positioned himself on the techno-commercialist axis of the trichotomy, so he was never being clandestine or something about his intentions. He was never an ethno-nationalist or theonomist, to use the NRX terminology. So
right.
I suppose it was almost a non sequitur, the entire the entire thing, but it was still funny to see. And people accusing him of racism, I mean, I don't know. I just find it so banal. It happens so often that eventually I just sort of tuned all that out. And the best, I mean, it just depends on your definition of racist. Land himself, of course, always to be provocative, labels himself a hyper racist, and he's for speciation, not for kind of, I guess you could say, parochial racism. So,
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, he talks about how what's coming down the pike with technology and socioeconomic sorting is basically going to make all of our current quibbles about racial differences more or less obsolete.
Right. Yes, indeed.
So,
the only reason why he's really tarred with that is because of there are quite a few people associated with NRX who could tend to the more vulgar ethno-nationalist side. And, when you're part of these things, the only people he's associated with that even really talk about that in detail, but it's always merely in an empirical, never polemical matter. People like HBD Chick, Harpending, those kind of people, and Steve Saylor, of course. So those kinds of people he's associated with, has interacted with quite a bit. And because of that, obviously guilt by association's very powerful tool on the internet. So that's that's the way it goes.
Yeah, that's all a very good mapping. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how and why exactly you moved away from NRX. Like, did your substantive viewpoints shift, or was it just you got tired of the milieu? Or tell us more.
Well, it's mostly when I began actually delving deeper into things. Someone asked in the chat earlier, and I was tempted to kind of write something back in the chat, but I always like to kind of soak up the questions first and then answer them, when I'm actually on, rather than in text form.
Yeah,
and one of the questions was like about the Goodreads, and I know this is sort of a digression from that question, but I'll circle back around to it.
Sure.
Recently, I read a paper, and I'll just read out the title here so people can look it up. It's actually quite interesting. It's called Interpassive User Complicity and the Returns of Cybernetics. And in it, I snipped out a small piece just because I thought it was, somewhat profound. And it's specifically talking about I think, social scientist by the name of Lovink, who defined a term. It's a rather unwieldy, clunky term. Calls it the psychopathology of information overload. And, regards to the Goodreads, that really kind of defines it. I mean, I try to be an archivist, but there's so much information nowadays, and it does kind of throw you for a loop. But circling back around to the NRX question, I would basically, because NRX is mostly a blogosphere type thing, mostly just read articles and watch interviews on YouTube or listen to podcasts. And eventually I just had this intuition that I wasn't getting to the meat of the thing by just constantly, you know, having sound, more or less like a sound bite, like a, I don't know, a montage, you could say, of all these various things. I felt like it was somewhat disorienting, and I needed a more stable foundation. So I bought Lain's collected writings, Fang Numina. I started reading that. Then just started looking at what other things Urbanomic had published, found the Accelerationist Reader, I read that, the entirety of that. And so it was more just through Land getting more interested in accelerationism. And as you've spoken about in other podcasts, like with Theory Talk, just starting to kind of drift away from politics and polemics in general and more towards, you know, cliche to use the kind of term like rigorous or something, but something a little more substantive than just podcasts and articles and essays. So yeah, and that's basically how I transitioned. Was I found more substantive materials and sort of latched onto that, and found the arguments and the ideas being brought forth there more convincing and more interesting. Not to say that they contradicted anything in NRX, but just they swung my attention elsewhere. And I've just sort of been swimming in that trajectory, swimming in that stream.
Right, right. Okay, fascinating. And so how did you get into being an archivist? You seem to have a real strong kind of, it appears maybe even somewhat compulsive streak of collecting and sharing. Is that fair to say? Or tell us more about that, because I'm very impressed by your archival efforts.
Yeah, I somewhat I don't know. It's an issue because it can take up a little bit too much time. You know, it is somewhat, as you said, it's a mania. It can become a mania. Try to keep it in check. I just every day I check several different websites that just post new content, and I try to see if there's anything I don't have, and if I don't have it, I usually download it and then sort it into onto an external hard drive. And then about a year ago, I thought, well, as a kind of spin-off of a Discord I was participating in, Accelerationist Discord, I thought, well, why don't I just gather all the materials that I can find that are relevant to accelerationism and create an online archive for them. So that's where, when I started, I just call it AAA, which kind of feeds into the accelerationist motif. And I started that, and yeah, I just continued the archivist practice of every day looking for new material. For instance, recently Nishiki on Twitter posted an archive link to an interview Lain did for Wired magazine in the 90s. And I downloaded that, created a PDF of it, and put it in the archive, and of course read it myself. I try to read most of the things I put into archives and things like that, just so if anyone asks me about it, I'm not, you know, just sitting there, you know, trying to give some sort of description of something I've never read or only have vague intimations of what's being talked about in the piece. So, but yeah, and obviously I haven't read most of the books I've downloaded, but when it comes to actually putting things in an archive and making it public, I try to be somewhat knowledgeable about the contents of that.
Right, right. Interesting. And so same thing, I guess, with your YouTube audiobooks that you upload all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Same idea behind it,
yeah.
Same motivation.
More or less, yeah. I found there are a lot of books that there's LibriVox, but those are only for books which are not copyright and are very popular. And there is a sort of, you know, ethical question of, well, should you be creating this kind of content when you know, these people are still alive that, you know, own own these books. And if I get an inquiry, for instance, I've gotten people on Twitter before contacting me saying, hey, you know, could you please take this down? Blah, blah, blah. We don't want this up. I will take it down. I'll happily take it down. But until I get those sorts of inquiries, I usually leave things up. And I've been doing that for, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years now. It's not a very difficult thing to do. It's just editing the text so that when it's read aloud by the whatever the AI, the synthetic voice, it's legible, and there's not like a ton of like footnotes and things within the actual text that could make things confusing. So it's not a very difficult process. It can sometimes be time consuming depending on the text. Like, just as an example, the Klosowski's Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle, the PDF for that has like imperfections, so that when you attempt to create it into an editable text and import it and all the technical details that go with that, there's like some chunks of the text, like even whole words, that get left out. So I more or less had to go through each page and see which words were left out and then replace them, so that when it was spoken over, it wouldn't leave portions of the text out. And there's a few mistakes in it, but more or less I'm pretty happy with that, how that production turned out.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, I've been very impressed by your diligence in doing all of that. You know, and it's really like it can be quite a thankless task, you know, because you really do provide, you know, service that people really use and enjoy and find valuable, but it doesn't get the kind of like street cred or, you know, attention or, you know, respect or admiration or whatever you want to call it that people get from like writing splashy blog posts or whatever. So, yeah, I just wanted to note that.
Yeah, that's something I definitely want to do too, is start actually writing things that are somewhat creative and not merely, I mean, maybe merely is not the right, you know, kind of descriptor for it, but just posting other people's content and making it more accessible. That's definitely something great. And I was still going to keep doing that, but I definitely feel like I'm at a point now where I have enough knowledge accumulated where I could speak somewhat confidently about certain things. And, you know, you always risk being a charlatan when you write those sorts of things without any sort of training, rigorous training in any discipline. But, you know, It's the blogosphere. I'm not writing a PhD thesis, so.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, cut loose. I mean, you definitely have more knowledge about this like arcane kind of like contemporary history than many people. I mean, even just like from being active and reading like the early Xenosystems, that whole culture, like I wasn't paying attention to this stuff at that time at all. So like the people who were kind of like reading that stuff at the time that it was really kicking up, you know, that's like that was like at the like the bleeding edge of all of this stuff. So, so yeah, you should definitely try to turn that knowledge into other things if you want to. But I mean, even if you just are an archivist, like that's quite a commendable, you know, contribution on its own terms. There's a question. That. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think people who like I'm curious, like, are you motivated by a larger kind of like politics there? Like, do you have a strong belief about, you know, the necessity for information to be free and freely available? And like, is that part of why you're so driven to do the Accelerationist archive and all the video uploadings?
Well, sure. I mean, as I said, I started out as a libertarian, so, and also been very big into torrenting since I was a teenager. So the free access and open access of information, I'm definitely very strongly in favor of. Could say mostly aligned with the cypherpunks and those kinds of political groups, and when it comes to that, right. Yeah, more or less.
I figured you wouldn't be doing all that if you didn't have some strong motivation in that sense. And yeah, I just think it's a thankless task, and it's generally an underappreciated task. Like the people who do the work of making PDFs available in one organized place and making, you know, like your YouTube has like a decent amount of subscribers, like 3 times more than I do. So, and like people actually watch those or listen to those audio uploads that you put. So like, you know, people are making use of it and it doesn't get the respect that it deserves. So yeah, that's just one thing I wanted to add on the record. We have a good question from the chat on this topic. JPEG Babes wants to ask you something. They say they're a fellow archivist themselves, and in terms of monitoring content online, do you use anything, Friedrich, like Newsboat or other RSS feed programs? Like, I guess the larger question is, maybe people are curious to know about, you know, your workflow and like the tools you use to manage this stuff.
I mostly just have a list. I have a WordPress blog myself, so I constantly check almost every day if there's new posts up on WordPress. They have an integrated feature where all the people you follow, all their posts automatically show up. Then I just monitor Twitter a lot to see if anyone posted anything. Like I said, for example, the Nishiki's find of the land piece in Wired from the 1990s, an archive of that. Then there's two sites I primarily use for like PDFs and stuff. There's I'm sure many people are familiar with it. It's just called ARG. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of a stupid pun. I'm guessing they use it as, you know, the pirate ARG. You know, it's a kind of a piracy pun.
Yeah, it's also kind of left leaning, I think, right?
Yeah, I monitor that, and then there's another site called Memory of the World, which also just posts PDFs almost every day. Although they've been having a little bit of technical issues, so it's a little bit annoying to browse through. But usually every week or so you can find something that you don't have, or you find a better copy of something that you already have. So that's more or less what I do. There's probably a much more efficient way to go about it, you know, utilizing RSS feeds and things like that. But I haven't gotten around to setting something like that up yet.
Do you try to follow all the blogs and stuff like that? Like, do you try to have your finger on all the different pulses, or no, it's not even possible?
I try, but, you know, as I was saying earlier with the information overload pathology,
right?
Really, you know, I could, you know, just read the entire description of it, because it really is a really apt way of describing kind of a condition I think most people have fallen into, including myself, that, you know, I try to keep out of. But let me just read this real quick. So it's a condition describing the unstoppable urge to keep oneself in a loop of constantly flowing updates, endlessly accumulating downloaded books, films, and music, perpetually bookmarking numerous web pages instead of reading them due to the lack of time and the pressure to keep up with the flow, and sharing them via social networks. These typical symptoms are far too familiar to nearly any user and are exploited within a 24/7 economy fueled by user-generated content and data mined and appropriated by corporations. So yeah, that's like the full kind of short description of the pathology. And definitely. It's definitely, you know, there's other books kind of detailing that, like 24/7 Capitalism, those sorts of books. But
what is the name of the article? What is the name of the article you mentioned?
Interpassive User Complicity and the Returns of Cybernetics.
Interpassive user complicity.
Yeah, interpassive user complicity.
Okay, I think I found it.
It's a very interesting article. I thought it was quite good. But yeah, I just try, you know, I don't want to be out of the flow, out of the loop. So what I attempt to do is just artificially limit, you know, for as far as a period as I can, the amount of things that I have to read or to watch and things like that. So at any given time, I'll have maybe like 5 or 6 things to read, watch, and consume, basically. And obviously my pool of things that I could watch are much higher, to read are much higher, as someone commented, with the 10,000 books I have on my to-read list now on Goodreads. But the amount that I'm actually reading at any given time, I try to limit, just so that I can actually be somewhat productive, because otherwise that pathology it becomes an acute pathology. So I think we all have that pathology to a weak extent. Just the acuteness, the intensity of it is among people, and I think before I had it far more intensely than I do now. So nice. I'm not saying I've weaned myself off of it, but I'm definitely a little more not as strongly affected by that particular pathology.
Right. I think that's sage advice. Yeah, I mean, there's just an ineluctable trade-off between learning and reading and consuming and getting anything done. So we got a few other questions. Do you have that these were sort of submitted before you arrived? Okay. Do you have any takes on True Detective, the television show?
Yeah, you know, I put up the one of the audiobook, versions of the book that the TV show takes a lot of its material from. I won't say steals. It's more of like an homage to the book, and that's The Conspiracy Against the Human Race by Thomas Ligotti. And I definitely find that that sphere interesting. The whole pessimist, cosmic pessimist, Eugene Thacker, Ligotti, those kinds of people. I find that somewhat interesting. I actually recently got a request to make an audiobook of one of Thacker's books, and I'll probably end up doing that within the month. But yeah, True Detective itself, it was definitely, when I first watched it, it really impressed me. It's probably my favorite, just the first season. The second season is quite good too, but it doesn't have, you don't feel like the same sort of ponderous, profound vibes that you get from the first season. And yeah, I actually read a book too, a collection of essays really, called True Detection, and it's specifically based on the first season of that series. Yeah, I think it's a great show. Lovecraftian horror, Robert Chambers, all that. Definitely struck a profound, deep chord with me when I watched it, and I've probably rewatched it at least twice since it's aired. So yeah, I suppose I would say read that collection. It's quite good. I actually wrote a review of it on Goodreads, and I pointed out my favorite essays from the collection. So if, you're short on time, you only want to maybe read a few good essays on the series, then definitely check out that review and read the suggested ones that I have there.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it's a great show.
Yeah, I watched it all. I liked it. I don't know if I have any takes on it, but I definitely agree that of the available fare, it's definitely towards the top of quality TV.
All right. I personally am not. I'm no longer really intensely interested in the kind of cosmic pessimism or pessimism in general. I've kind of tended towards. I don't know if you know him, Fernando Pessoa. He's a Portuguese writer, and Cicero's take on pessimism, which is basically that, speculating about the uselessness, or as Ligotti says, the malignant uselessness of life, is kind of self-defeating. It's funny. You could almost draw parallels between it and trying to think capital in itself, if to tie it into an accelerationist theme, where the futility becomes, you receive almost like a burnout from pondering its futility. The object or the prescriptive elements of life are almost just as opaque as capital itself. So I still find thoughts and arguments regarding that interesting. I'm just not as intensely interested in it as I was when I created the audiobook for Ligotti's piece, which is actually quite popular. It's probably one of my most viewed audiobooks on YouTube. So because it gained kind of popular notoriety.
So we actually, I think we just got a few retweets from people on Twitter. So we got some new people, and I'm also seeing on Twitter I just fielded a question on Twitter. Someone who's watching is asking, this is Andrew Stover. What's up, Andrew? Says, I've heard cave Twitter mentioned multiple times. What is it exactly? Would you like to take a stab at that, Friedrich?
Okay, sure. So cave Twitter, it coalesced primarily around Ret Twitter. I guess you could say it's kind of Ret Twitter redivivus. It's kind of the resurrection of Ret Twitter. So probably any discussion of this has to start with Ret Twitter. Ret Twitter was kind of almost like a parody. It was centered around a Wired journalist named Lain, and more or less not very interesting figure, just a tech journalist, but it somehow stuck.
A physicist, I believe.
Yeah, it primarily it's stuck because of Good Theory guy on Twitter. That's his handle. Vincent Garton's efforts. It more or less was just a space talking about accelerationism, Land's ideas, making a lot of memes about Land, and people there like Xenogothic, who you interviewed, Meta Nomad to a certain extent, who you just recently interviewed, Cocky Duty on Twitter, his blog Totalitarian Collectivist. So you have a lot of people, and basically that original kind of Twitter blogosphere, whatever you want to term it, internet subculture, sort of, I don't know, it didn't die out in an abrupt way. It just sort of, the activity by the users and things became less and less uses of the hashtag, etc. And then cave Twitter was born when someone asked me, I think it was about 6 months ago, what is cave Twitter? Because I've gotten this question before on Twitter specifically, and I've always pointed at Xenogothic, specifically his earlier stuff, not so much to do with patchwork, but to do with more like aesthetic and almost like everyday life blog posts, where he posted pictures of catacombs and caves and things like that. And it just formed around a general aesthetic. If you want to actually know the origins, like the whole lore behind it, Edmund Berger's posted about it before. You just have to kind of scroll through the archive of his tweets, and that's a difficult task because he's posted quite a lot. So, but basically, yeah, it's just a loose association, a lot like, I guess, sort of like Frog Twitter, but I would say somewhat more intellectually oriented, less politically oriented, and accelerationist, xenofeminism, all the various things that have been grouped together loosely.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I would add maybe just a few things for people interested in this. I guess this is one thing I have some familiarity with, because I guess I'm pretty adjacent to it. So Ret Twitter, which, as you correctly noted, was the original version, which would later then kind of morph into cave Twitter. You correctly noted that Ret refers to RHETT, that refers to a science writer, kind of intellectual guy named Rhett Lain. And so I might mess up this story slightly. If anyone knows it better, they can correct me in the chat. But what you didn't mention was that he went to school at one point with Nick Land.
Right.
And I believe if I recall correctly, he was he was kind of on the outskirts of the CCRU, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there was some occult, some sort of subterranean influence, and rumors that he was slightly associated with CCRU. Right.
And so but he's very different, because he has a strong kind of formal math background, and he's like a physicist, I believe, by training.
Right.
So basically he went separate ways, from Nick Land and the others. And now he's actually like a pretty established science writer, I believe.
Yes.
So he's like very normie, respectable, and very brilliant kind of mathy type guy who does science writing. And but there's a fabled text and this is kind of like the main point of interest around Rhett Lain, which is there's supposedly a text that he wrote with Nick Land about, I believe, again, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's supposed to be about necrophysics was the idea. And so, yeah, it's this like
it's one of those kind of Necronomicon type.
Yes, that's right. That's
hoaxes. Right. It's actually, yeah, the Lovecraftian sort of connections are definitely palpable there.
Yes, that's right. So there's a lot of mystery surrounding that, but apparently there is supposed to be some lost paper that is a combination of kind of Landian CCRU work with presumably a kind of like some sort of mathematical, physical, physicalist model or approach combined with it, right? So I think it's fabled. I don't believe anyone has their hands on it. I could be wrong, but this is a kind of lore. This is founding kind of cave Twitter lore, basically. Originally Rhett Twitter, and I don't know about the full status of it. Edmund Berger is in the chat. What's up, Ed? He asks when I'm gonna get Rhett on the live stream. Well, don't dig that up. J Murph is tweaking it as it is. What do you mean, Alice? Yeah. Should I not?
Yeah, someone posted it's a hyperstition. It is very hyperstitional, like the entire. And I think whoever started that rumor was definitely in tune with that entire theoretical apparatus surrounding hyperstition. So
right. So as with many things in this strange space, how much of it is empirically real and how much of it is hyperstition? Well, the whole point of that concept is it's truly and genuinely hard to know sometimes. So
distinguish between the two. Kind of is a quasi Baudrillardian sort of concept.
Right. So hang on, there was just one thing. Oh yeah, what I wanted to say was to Ed's question about if I could get Rhett on the live stream. I'll definitely add him to my rapidly growing list of people that I'm being told to get on the live stream. But one thing I'll say is, like, I remember in the heady days of early Rhett Twitter, there was definitely a lot of efforts made to rope him into like the meme wars, and he never played ball. He seems to have a pretty strong he seems to have pretty strong repressive defense mechanisms about his entire history with Nick Land and the CCRU, and any ghosts of that time period he seems to be,
which is healthy,
strongly opposed to interacting with. But I think
it's a very healthy thing.
Probably healthy, but I don't think we should give up trying to reconnect with him.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not on meth right now. Thank you very much. If I was on meth, I would tell you. I would be straight with you. Don't worry. I was actually talking with someone last night in private chats about doing psychedelics on the live stream. I think I will do something like that sometime in the not too distant future. Stay tuned. Anyway, so Rhett Twitter becomes cave Twitter, and I think you more or less correctly described that kind of milieu, which I think you and I are both kind of we tend to circulate in. The only thing I would add, maybe for people who are really curious about, because this has kind of, I guess, become one of the main themes of this live stream show. It was like pretty spontaneous. I didn't necessarily have this planned out, but it seems like learning more about ideological subcultures is like a lot of people who have messaged me with interest in the show. They kind of have said explicitly that's like what they're kind of tuning in for now. So might as well drill a little bit further into it. So if people are interested in this, like, I would just add one wrinkle to what you said, which is my read on it is that roughly the split between Rhett Twitter and cave Twitter was somewhat ideological, I think. Is that fair to say? Do you recall that? Not a strong kind of like ideological faction or anything, but my memory is that Rhett Twitter was a little bit more kind of explosively ideologically how should I put this, diverse. It had kind of unsustainable ideological diversity in the original Rhett Twitter, I think, and I think there was a kind of inevitable kind of fragmentation that would come through roughly around sociological or ideological lines. So this is just to say that roughly cave Twitter is more, it's accelerationism, and more cave Twitter is more directly adjacent to what we call unconditional accelerationism. So more politically neutral and also a little bit more academic oriented, I would say.
Yeah, Red Twitter had, you know, almost everything under the sun yet, you know, the right accelerationists. And I mean, you still get that issue with the health threads, which luckily or unfortunately there hasn't been one in a little while now. But I was, as I said, I was merely lurking at the time of Red Twitter, and I was only really at the dawn of Cave Twitter that I actually started getting involved with that scene. So yeah, my memory of the Red Twitter period, aside from sort of the memes, the substantive part of Red Twitter, I'm not exactly too knowledgeable on. Someone like Edmund Berger or Vincent would probably know exactly, deeply, intimately everything, including the lore that went on. So yeah,
right. But that was I think that was a fun little recap and a little trip down memory lane. So I guess probably that was when you and I probably first interacted, was back in the Ret Twitter days. Is that fair to assume?
yeah, I believe so. I started seeing some of your posts, and I think see what was the first time I actually interacted. I think maybe it was when you had the interview with Cyborg Nomad with I'm trying to, now I'm blanking on his name. You said it earlier.
Uriello.
Yeah, Uriello. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's when I first sort of actually started listening to all the the podcasts and looking through your archives, seeing like who you'd interviewed and kind of listening to the ones that catch my fancy.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Appreciate your interest. So, one other question. Well, there's actually a bunch of questions, but just going one at a time. Someone asked about what do you think about how the conspiracy world has taken up Carroll Quigley? And I guess there's some connection to the videos you did of Carroll Quigley. I don't understand completely the context of the question, but
well, yeah, Carroll Quigley. So Carroll Quigley is kind of, he's about as close to a sane sort of conspiracy theory. I mean, it's hard. I hesitate to use the word conspiracy theorist because there's more to him than that. But yeah, I was sort of somewhat interested in that sort of thing maybe 3 years ago now. So my memory of that, you know, one of the effects of the psychopathology I mentioned earlier is that your memory, your attention span and your memory span sort of compresses, I suppose you could say. But Quigley wrote many sort of, I guess you could say, compared to other people who dwell in conspiracy and that sort of sphere. Yeah, he was the evolution of civilizations. That's the primary thing that I was interested in with him. That's the primary thing where I actually, so not so much the the conspiracy part of it, but the theoretization of the evolution of civilizations, because I was interested in Spengler as well. And Quigley is another one of those names that pops up when you look into Spengler. They both have these kind of grand overarching theories of civilization.
So do you know this guy's work well? Could you give us a quick kind of TLDR? Or no, if you don't, that's okay.
Not actually. Yeah, as far as conspiracy stuff goes, I'm not very familiar with his.
So why were people asking me to ask you about this? Is it because you made videos of his stuff or what?
Well, let's see. Well, I made videos of Spengler, and like I said, he's I believe I also made an audiobook of his specifically his book on civilization. I was requested to do it, and I haven't actually read the evolution of civilizations. I made an audiobook of that about a year ago. I was requested to do so. But yeah, the conspiracy, specifically the conspiracy stuff, I'm not too well versed on what he thought. I just know that he wrote one major book that dealt with sort of conspiratorial elements called Tragedy and Hope. and I'm sure I've read excerpts of it, but nothing that I could speak with any authority on whatsoever.
Do you have any takes on the new Center for Research and Practice? Someone wanted to know.
I'm very glad that they exist. I don't want to be overly critical. There was that post about a year ago now. It was either by Mo or Jason Adams, one of the people who runs it, basically saying we're no longer going to be hosting Nick Land's seminars because X, Y, and Z reason, primarily because I'm guessing because they got pressure from outside, more and more pressure, because they'd always gotten it regarding Nick Land, but I guess eventually it got to them and they just didn't think it was worth all the criticism anymore. But I'm very glad it exists. I'm very glad that, you know, they didn't immediately panic and remove all the links to Lain seminars and pretend as if they'd never hosted him, or because that's certainly something they could have done. The links are still up. You can still watch all 4 of his seminars if you want. There's a Word document with the links to all the various ones, including Reza Negrestani's and Ray Brassier's seminars in the archive I created. So you can still go back and watch all those, and I'm very glad they exist. They're still doing great stuff. I really want to somehow get my hands on Bracier's recent seminar, Marx and Philosophy. They put out the first seminar of that, and it seemed really interesting. I watched through all of his seminar on Hegel. It's quite interesting. So I've yet to get to Reza's stuff, but Reza's stuff is quite dense. I think someone in the chat earlier mentioned that Reza kind of went the way of Rhett, actually, in the sense of being very interested in theory fiction, and now it's more analytical philosophy and those sorts of things. And I mean, I'm still holding my breath. I pre-ordered Intelligence and Spirit, the new book that's coming out from Urbanomic, and can't wait to get to read that. I think I looked today, it's something like 626 pages, so that's going to be fun. Apparently a lot of, it's going to be a difficult a difficult thing to get through, but I definitely I'm very excited for that. And so yeah, like I said, New School, I have a highly positive view on them in general, even if they, regrettably decided that they would no longer host Lain seminars. But
cool.
What can you do? I'm not going to just turn away from it.
Yeah, those are good, generous, and thoughtful takes. Yeah, thanks for sharing. That was one of the questions that was asked. I mean, I feel like I've given you a long enough laundry list of questions from the crowd. And there might be some more that emerge, and we can discuss them as they rise if we're interested in them. But maybe we can open up the conversation a little bit more into, whatever you might be interested in. Is there anything in particular that you're thinking really hard about right now that you're especially fascinated by, whether it be maybe something going on in politics that you find especially interesting or important that's kind of on your mind, or something in the real world going on right now that you find like worth notable or worth noting, or you'd like to talk about, or books or stuff that you're like
talk
especially
about those
intrigued.
things. You could also just circle back to some of the stuff that, I mean, obviously maybe it gets a bit tired speaking about the same things, but talking about what you talked about with Storm King and Metanomad and Land and such. Just generally, where we're heading, and upwingers versus downwingers, all of that, that sort of thing. I kind of gave a little bit of thought to it before the Hangout.
Oh, cool.
That's some of the questions I'd anticipated, considering I'm sort of in the same sphere and interact with those people quite a bit. So
okay, cool. Yeah. Right. So I take the floor. And anything that's jumping off the tip of your tongue right now?
Sure. Well, one thing that was really that came to my mind when listening to the Storm King interview was one of Land's pieces, probably one of the lesser known pieces because it's not on XS, or I don't believe any of his blogs. It's called Lure of the Void, and it's really it really addresses the kind of black versus green, upwinger versus downwinger question really substantively. It's
Wait, can you
specifically
remind me
about
what is the upwinger versus downwinger distinction? I'm not recalling.
it's basically people are upwing want to colonize space, people are downwing want to stay on Earth. So it's the black. Yeah, there's all sorts of names for it, black and green. Obviously, green being sort of a narco-primitivist or more ecologically focused people, and then people who care about space exploration and all those sorts of things. So
up and down is roughly ac and dec, right? Or no?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, with these sorts of distinctions, they're fuzzy distinctions to begin with,
Yeah.
which is not a bad thing by any means. They're fuzzy distinctions to begin with, but yeah, I would say to a certain degree, yeah, they map along those. They correlate to those specific. What would you say, Weltanschauungen or whatever. But yeah, Lure of the Void really, I think, is quite an important piece to contribute to that specific debate. And it's specifically, Lain talks about kind of the deceleration of the space program and the discourse around, helping people on Earth and, all this stuff in space. And this is obviously why he champions people like Musk so much, is just because it's the only real glimmer of hope we've seen towards an an upwing trajectory, really. And obviously all the other reasons. Yeah, okay, so it is on the site that
this is the one that
Cyborg Nomad set up.
Uriel.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So go on. I didn't mean to interrupt
you.
Yeah,
like
you were summarizing it.
Old PDF. Yeah, he talks a lot about it in the piece about the upwing versus downwing sort of narrative and how it directly pertains to to I guess you could say, it's something that Meta Nomad brought up last time, is that the likelihood of any sort of, and obviously there's more intelligent ways maybe to approach it, but any sort of downwing narrative is highly likely to lead to like a Z-act, zombie act sort of scenario. Because just due to various things that Lain has spoken about in depth, like IQ shredders, and there's actually a sort of somewhat occult reference that I think is still up on his on Xenosystems on the sidebar, which is a I can link it in the chat. It's a paper by a IQ researcher in Germany called "The Population Cycle Drives Human History from a Eugenic Phase into a Dysgenic Phase and Eventual Collapse," and he mentions it in a few of his excess blog posts, but it's always just kind of there, I think, especially on posts like IQ Shredder and things like that. And I really do believe that it's very important, concerning the themes of act versus deck and things like that. Just because I don't see, the slogan, "The only way out is through," is, or I'm probably bungling that somehow. But it's bandied about quite often, and it's used by Lain several times to describe the kind of the exit strategy. You can only really go through techno capital, through technomic acceleration. You can't attempts to route around it and all these other things. Those are things that capital itself does, and any attempt, by puny humans, so to speak, to do such a thing, planning, and then you end up in all the pitfalls of left accelerationism,
right?
Which we could enumerate, but I'm sure people are somewhat already well versed and maybe even tired of hearing about all the issues with left accelerationism.
Yeah, maybe. I liked what you were talking about with the idea of an off-planet future for humans, and then Zombiac being what's left on Earth. Is that what you were saying?
Right. Well, it's something that Lain mentions in his discussion about the film Elysium, which sort of replicates that scenario in cinematic form. That was, I believe, director Neil Blomkamp. I really like District 9, and that was the movie he made directly after District 9. It's not a great movie in terms of just a movie, but in terms of like the content, how it's kind of presented, I think it's well done, and it kind of replays that scenario of people have kind of gone out world, and it's kind of, you know, of course, it's like all entirely white upper class people, and then all down on the planet it's sort of like slums favela type situation, and the main character attempts to I believe the kind of emotional hook is like save a child who's suffering from some sort of disease, but can only be helped by medicine that's on this, you know, extraterrestrial colony basically. And yeah, it's basically about the him trying to do that and the resentment of all the people on Earth kind of ruining everything, because the spoilers, but the colony, things don't work out for the colony. Let's put it that way. If you haven't seen the movie, I won't spoil more than that, but yeah.
Right. I mean, I think that scenario feels plausible to me.
It feels plausible, and it's also, I mean, I'd be more than interested in hearing what people like Storm King and other intelligent people on the deck side of things think about this. But, you know, I just don't see, especially considering the population, just the sheer population density of the Earth, that you could ever go back to a sort of feudal arrangement, as he was postulating in his interview with you, just because the organizational structures required for governance of these vast swaths of populations are very inefficient in any case under a feudal model. So yeah, I mean, I don't see it happening, and I feel like if anything, it would be a sort of enclave, an enclave project, you know, which is maybe all you can hope for anyways. Maybe I'm straw manning the deck position in this case. But yeah, I just feel like offered colonization is something that's an absolute imperative to land, and in my opinion, just any future-oriented politics in general, regardless left or right, and unconditional, whatever the, you know, the particular valence that you'd like to take up with that. I just think it's absolutely a substantive part of future-oriented politics.
Right, right.
Kind of cap it.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question to ask the deceleration people. You know, it was interesting. Like, one of the really interesting things about this live stream thing I'm doing is you sometimes get a little surprised about what people are like with respect to their, you know, in comparison to their avatar and their, yeah, and their, you know, kind of like web presence. Persona.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and like sometimes people impress you, like they pleasantly surprise you, like you know, whatever assumption you had about someone's avatar and general web presence, sometimes talking with them, they're like much more articulate and much more, they seem even more intelligent than you might have assumed from their web presence. And it's like, you're pleasantly surprised, and that's fascinating. And then sometimes it's interesting because the opposite can happen too. And sometimes people cultivate pretty good, strong web presences, and it's like pretty slick and seems like there's a lot going on under the hood intellectually. And then sometimes you talk with them and then you're kind of like, huh, interesting. You know, maybe there's not as much going on under the hood as I actually thought there was from looking at the web presence. And right. I'm not, you know, calling out any names on either end of that equation, either pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised. But it's that's been one of the more fascinating things to observe in doing these live streams.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just throwing it out there. You made me think of it in your comments about some of the different people I've talked with.
Yeah, I mean, I find most of the people, at least the interviews that I've heard, most of them I've been, somewhat pleasantly surprised. I mean, it's much easier, obviously, to be articulate in the form of writing, and everyone has performance anxiety to more or less intense degrees. So you can't judge people too harshly, especially if it's their first take, so to speak. But
oh yeah, no, I'm not. Yeah, no, I'm not judging anyone that way. I'm just saying. Oh no, now I feel bad. Now I feel like I was being mean or something. No,
no. I mean, you didn't name any names, so there's no need to feel bad. I mean, it's just a general observation.
Yeah, no, and you're totally right. I'm just saying it's funny how there's like always a little bit of a gap, whether it's positive or negative, between what how you kind of eye people up on the internet, and then what you get talking to them. But I think ultimately talking with people is like one of the most efficient and generally accurate ways to get a sense of who someone is, like where they're at, what kind of what type of person they are, what type of what type of contribution they're like bringing to the table, and there are just different there are different types of that, yeah, it's fascinating. Like one example was it was really interesting, like talking with Storm King guy, like how he had this like strong Southern accent, which I thought was like really cool, really cool and funny, because and one of the things I've learned from doing this live stream is how sensitive we are to cues that are like really superficial. Like so for instance, he, like, if you remember his profile picture on Twitter was for a while, it was like this like really how should I put this, like almost like posh hipster looking like mountain man, with like it was like a young chiseled man with like a nicely shaped beard, kind of looked like a handsome hipster boy who like gets lots of chicks at like the local
from like New England or something.
Yeah. And it's just so funny because obviously it's just an avatar. Like obviously we know this. You can't like take any of these images too seriously. And I know that intellectually, but but when I talked with Storm King, and I was like kind of taken aback by his demeanor and his style and his accent and the whole, you get all these different signals, you get this different information, and then suddenly you update your model of the type of person you're talking with, and it's just so fast. It's just so fascinating how different it can be than what you assumed about someone based on such superficial internet-based images. And
just like a small aside, I think the profile picture he has now, which is of Guts from Berserk and his Berserker armor, is far more fitting, I suppose you can say. Just look up Berserker armor. You'll find pictures of it. It's one of my favorite kind of manga series. It's probably something, totally off topic, but I just thought I'd throw it out there since we were talking about him and his avatar. I find it a little more fitting for his kind of persona.
No, well, that's a great segue actually, because that actually, you just touched two questions that people previously asked, and I didn't know how to like segue into them because I don't even really know what they are. But one is someone wanted to ask you about Berserk. I literally don't even know what that is, but you just mentioned it. And someone also wanted to ask about your anime stuff. So maybe could you do it like some sort of riff on those things?
Sure. Yeah, I still have some things on Accelerationism, but we can circle back around to that later. So Berserk is a manga series illustrated by Kentaro Miura, and it's been going on for a while now. It started coming out in the late 1980s, the early 1990s. The prototype came out in the late 1980s, and it's basically just. It's hard to describe it. It's dark fantasy, very visceral. The manga, the illustration is very well done. It's part of the reason why it's been going on so long, because it takes a very long time for him, since he's writing the story and illustrating. Sometimes you'll have someone writing the story and another person illustrating, but since he does both, it takes him a very long time. Anyone that's unfamiliar with it, I'd recommend watching the anime that came out in the 90s first. It's about 26 episodes long, and it's a lot more approachable, easier to get into than the manga. That's how I got into it personally, so I would definitely recommend starting with that. The ending leaves on a gigantic, brutal, absolutely brutal, like Lovecraftian cliffhanger. So it definitely makes you immediately want to read the manga after you're finished with the show. So it leaves you wanting more. But yeah, I mean, it's my favorite manga of all time. Anime, I like things. I like it a lot as well. But anime like Ghost in the Shell, you can just look at my top 10 anime on my my anime list profile. Things like Ghost in the Shell. Yeah, Technolize, a couple ones back from the days when I was a little less mature, which I still just love because they left such an impression on me, but that objectively probably aren't as good as I'm rating them. But yeah, just in general, you can, if you want to, you can link the About Me page, or, you know, actually I can do that in the chat, and that has like a link to all my various profiles. The one where I put up like ratings for film, and another one for anime, and all those sorts of things. So I'm pretty well plugged in it when it comes to quantitatively rating stuff I consume. So yeah.
So do you, I could ask you a quick question about that, but if you wanted to circle back to the accelerationism stuff, if you had a thought on your mind, you could do that, or I could ask you a follow-up question.
We can stay on this track.
So
for a little while.
I'd like to invite you to explain anime to me, because I'm kind of like one of those people who, oh, that's so interesting. What is that? Do you see that?
Sorry,
did you
what?
send me a link?
Oh yeah, I sent you the link because for some reason I just couldn't post it in the chat. It was like you are not allowed to post.
Cool. I've never. So. Oh, okay. I got it now. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So I'm sort of like a typical like normie with respect to anime. Like, I don't understand it. I've never really watched it. To my boring, like uneducated, uninformed, like white male eyes, it just looks like like I see it as children's cartoons. But I'm sure there's like a deeper layer to it, because I know lots of people who are quite interested in it. So I would just like to invite you to, maybe you could explain to me why like what is the appeal of anime?
Well, the appeal of anime, at least for me, is that it's a separate medium where very profound sort of stories can be engaged with. At the beginning, of course, it's like almost everyone that gets into anime, there's a hook, right? There's always a hook, and the hook is usually immature. For me, it was what I refer to in as a subgenre. It's called shonen, which is mostly like material oriented for young men, like teenage boys and things like that. And it's mostly shows like Naruto, Bleach, that sort of thing. And obviously, looking back, you're kind of disgusted at yourself that you were ever into that. But that's how you get into it. And some people stay there. And that's kind of where I think the negative perception, it comes from that, and also from a trend in anime that started somewhere in the mid-2000s called moe, which is basically just shows about cute, usually like middle school to high school girls just doing kind of everyday boring things. And those are usually categorized under the genres of slice of life and moe. And that's the sort of anime I really dislike, but it's one of the most popular. There's some good shows here and there that are just kind of like, I don't know, endearing, I guess you could say, and just sort of fun to watch. And there's nothing wrong with them per se. It's just that for me, it's not the type of anime I like, and I feel like it's given the medium in general a bad reputation. But really, in the West, the popular reception of anime really began with Akira. I'm not sure if you've seen that movie. It's was a very popular anime movie that was released. Ghost in the Shell, obviously, which was also made a huge splash. And then as far as series go, Cowboy Bebop, which really appeals to Western audiences, is because it's kind of like it's set in space, but it's very much structured like a Western. and a lot of the series, there's an arc, but a lot of the episodes are sort of episodic, and you can just pick up kind of an episode, some of the episodes, and just like the show, like the characters, without watching the whole series. And if you're new to anime and you've never watched any, I would definitely recommend starting with something like Cowboy Bebop. It's just a really well done show. Animation's great. The English dub for it is excellent. Some people say it's better than the actual Japanese voice acting done for it. So yeah, I mean, the huge appeal of anime in the West is, it's somewhat inexplicable, but it really goes back, as I already mentioned, to kind of shonen, which was like the first phase of popularity. Obviously Pokemon, things like that, things more oriented for kids, which anyone who's my age, you didn't ask, but I'm 22, is interested in, what grew up with as a child. So, and then obviously, like I said, the kind of more moe, cute girls doing cute things sort of wave that struck, which I'm, again, as I said, not a very big fan of, but it's there and there's nothing you can do about it. There's so many shows dealing in that subgenre now that it's just kind of like, you kind of just have to turn your head away in disgust. Eventually.
Someone else wants you to talk about serial experiments, Lain.
Oh, okay.
What's
yeah,
that?
Sure. I can talk about Lain. So Lain is it's very important show for anime because it was one of the first that really, it was a really good show that got through with a lot on a very small budget. That's its importance for anime, but its importance for kind of our sphere of things is that it's very it's almost like Gnostic, it's like techno-Gnostic oriented show, in the sense that the main character, as the series progresses, it's kind of like doesn't make any sense. You start out with this middle school girl, middle to high school, she's like 12 or 13, kind of like, well, this is boring, what is this? Then it starts getting to more cyberpunk themes. Like one of the main kind of settings of the show is a bar called Siberia, and they take a drug called Accelerando, or no, it's not Accelerando, it's Acceleration Nut or something like that.
Really?
It's like a small microchip, yeah, and it specifically has the term acceleration in the name of the drug. So things like that, and I won't spoil it because it's a great show.
So it's like the accelerationist anime.
It's not the accelerationist anime, but it's something that touches on a lot of themes that have to do with things like hyperstition. Just a lot of, you can see a lot of crossover between like CCRU's work and the themes that are explored in Lain. Like there's this gigantic like occult network. It's something called the Knights of something, like almost like the Knights of the Rosy Cross kind of, but it's like Knights of, using some sort of tech name instead of a traditional like occult secret society name. And they have like, they control like all like huge sectors of the Wired is what they call it. So it's almost like it jacks in with things like Neuromancer and things like that, in the sense that Lain, half or if not more of the show is spent in a virtual environment, and then towards the end the lines between virtual and real start to blur, and what we expect now of these kind of Baudrillardian kind of themes, where simulacrum, how can you tell the real from the copy? A show that I recently watched again, Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, also goes into this in the first season, about how can you have a copy without an original, things like that. I'm actually going to post a clip of that later on my Twitter this weekend, probably. So yeah, Lain is very interesting. I definitely wouldn't recommend it for someone who's new to anime, though. It's not something, if you're really interested in those themes, like you are, for instance, you could probably get into it. But if it's just someone who's interested in anime and wants to watch a good anime, and it's as an introductory thing, it's not good. Well, it's good, but it's not the best kind of appetizer, I suppose you could say. And show in that vein, if no one's seen it, which I just thought I'd mention, if they like Lain, is called a Textualize, and it's almost like a cyber pessimist. It's like a negative take on technology. So people who maybe are more interested even in like the deck narrative of things would be interested in it, because it's basically about technology, but instead of enhancing human beings, it like almost cripples human beings. It's a very, very interesting show. So it's very pessimistic, very bleak show. It's probably one of the most bleak series I've ever watched of any anime. It's very good. So it's like Technolize, but spelled with an X instead of a C. That's the name of it, and it's very good. It has like has a techno, techno score and everything. Just does the aesthetics very well. But it's very bleak and it's very slow paced. It's a slow burner of a show. A lot of people quit after the first 3 episodes because they can't get through it. That's a very good show.
Fascinating.
Anyways,
well,
yeah.
You just gave me a nice little schooling in anime, and it is fascinating to hear that there's such surprisingly almost explicit accelerationist themes. So that's fascinating. I'll definitely look into it. I mean, I think I have a broken brain in the sense that like I'm kind of like very dull when it comes to all forms of fiction. Like I've just become, over the years, I've become, more and more just like a social science type of person, and I kind of exclusively read and watch nonfiction stuff.
Yeah.
But I do have to start. It's been on my list of things to do to really start exercising my like the fiction part of my brain more. So
right. Yeah. I mean, it's something that I do too. Usually, like when I'm reading, I usually, like currently I'm reading, just to understand land better, I'm reading the Bataille Reader put out by Blackwell. So it's just like a collection of his texts with some commentary, like introductory commentary and things like that. Because, Bataille is incredibly, the more I'm reading it, the more I realize, Bataille is incredibly important for land, especially in his early phase and even today. So I'm reading, and I just got finished reading both volumes of Capitalism and Schizophrenia, so Anti-Oedipus and 1,000 Plateaus. Just basically, because I started with Fang Numina, and I realize now that probably wasn't a good idea. I mean, I got a lot out of it. I understood land more, but understanding Fang Numina without first at least having read Neuromancer, Anti-Oedipus, and at least some Bataille is very difficult. And then, of course, to a certain extent, Freud and Lacan too. That's very important too, is his theory of the libido and desire and things like that. But yeah, anyways, so what I was saying was, I usually always try to read more nonfiction than fiction, but I always at least try to read one book that's nonfiction. Like right now I'm reading the novel version upon which one of my favorite anime is based on, Legend of the Galactic Heroes, which in my estimation is probably the greatest science fiction, sci-fi opera, that kind of subgenre of science fiction where it's like very grandiose, and like you have 2 sides fighting it out over the the galaxy or the universe, things like that. One of the best just space opera stories ever written, in my estimation, and it was originally a novel series before being turned into an animated series of, God, I watched it a year ago, but I think it's about 130 episodes. It's a very long animated series. It's very dialogue heavy. All the fight scenes there are some up and close and personal fight scenes, but most of the fight scenes are like naval battles almost. It's just like it has a lot to do with strategy and tactics, and it's more heady than your average space opera. But I'm reading the novels of that, and so that's kind of like my nonfiction. Before that, I read Neuromancer, and then Stevenson, things like that. But I always try to keep things, if not fiction, then like theory fiction or something like that, something that has that draws heavily on fictional elements.
Okay, cool.
So I always try to keep one of those going to kind of engage that part of my brain, like you were talking about, instead of just keeping it only on the left hemisphere or whatever if you wanted to use.
Right. That sounds like a good strategy. So we're getting some fresh questions in the chat.
Nice. All right.
I need to send a question back to Alice Farmer. I need to know, where did this meme about me having a meth habit come from? I don't think I'm the type of person who gives any indication of.
It could be to do with Lain's use in the 90s of amphetamines,
Yeah,
and it's actually funny. It's one of the things that people have drawn attention to, at least occasionally, is the somewhat insipid connection between Ayn Rand and Lain's use of amphetamines.
Really?
So they're like the two. Yeah, was also heavily addicted to the substance, heavily abused
Ayn Rand
amphetamines.
Was?
Yeah. So
I didn't know Ayn Rand used Adderall or amphetamines. That's fascinating.
Speed.
No wonder
abused it.
No wonder she was, so like optimistic about the strength of like individual power. Like, you take Adderall and you're like, I could totally understand getting the idea of Atlas Shrugged, oh, 1 more milligram, I could carry the entire earth.
I could bear the weight of the world on my shoulders. Yeah, exactly.
That's
so
funny,
maybe it comes from that.
But I mean, I've done my fair share of Adderall for sure, but I've never done meth. No, let alone I don't have a meth habit at all. Yeah, Alice says Rand, Land, and now J Murph. No, I'll never do.
That's funny. Meth. Rand, Land. I never actually. That's a nice connection there as well. Rand, Land.
Oh wow, that's there's something going on there, I think. So I feel like I'm pretty thanks. Strawberry Letter is sticking up for me. I feel like I'm pretty like calm. I'm pretty like nice guy. I don't really seem hopped up, I don't think, on anything, do I? Alice says I'm tweaking now. Okay, I'm getting pulled down this rabbit hole. Are you a religious person, Friedrich?
I'm a lapsed Catholic.
Oh, okay.
It'd be interesting to see, because we have Vincent now, who's a kind of, he's a confirmed Catholic now. I'm not sure, he maybe kept up with all those developments, and he's written some Catholicism.
Yeah.
Right, and it'd be interesting to see how many of us are Protestant culturally Protestant influence, and how many of us are Catholic. Those are the different, I mean, lapsed or otherwise, right? Just like that cultural influence. But for me, I was full on Latin Mass, kind of high order Catholic.
Oh, really? So why did you give that up?
Partially just teenage rebellion and a general, I suppose, just general waning of faith.
Sure.
I kind of compare it to not to be grandiose or anything, compare that development to kind of what Heidegger went through with his like intense, or even the director of Ghost in the Shell, Mamoru Oshii, he had kind of the same experience where he was like training to become a seminarian, and he became lapsed, and that's how thank God, because otherwise we wouldn't have gotten all the great Ghost in the Shell and Angel's Egg and all the great productions he's been involved in. But Heidegger, the same thing, training to be a seminarian, and very deeply entrenched in that tradition, and then kind of lapsing. And I feel like, not to be grandiose and compare myself to these very esteemed notaries, but I feel somewhat have a similar experience there. I was kind of intensely religious, and then I guess you could say it was almost like a burnout. Who knows? Maybe something will rekindle there. I'm not sure.
You were you actually wanted to pursue a life in the priesthood?
No, but I was very active. Like I wasn't one of those teenagers for a while anyways who was like, oh, mass, why do I have to go? Can't I just stay home, play video games, something like that, right? I actually wanted to go to Latin Mass and things like that. So not I was considering something like that. That was always on the horizon, but I was never dead set like, oh, I want to enter seminary or something, you know, religious teaching, religious
Right.
schooling of any sort. I wasn't really dead set on that track.
So do you currently feel any gravitational pull back towards that?
I definitely think seeing where Garton's going, Vincent's going, the direction he's going in, I'm definitely interested in, you know, getting back into some of that, like reading Balthazar. He's been quoting a lot from Balthazar, and just what I've been seeing has been very, very impressive. And I feel like, if nothing else, there can be a lot of, I mean, the connection between theology and capital has already been noted multiple times by Lain, and various CCRU texts. It's been noted. Theology and the occult and things like that. And I think I believe it towards the end of the interview with Meta Nomad, he also mentioned that he's going in the direction of occultism and politics and acceleration and things like that. So I think that's maybe just a general tendency. There's some sort of gravity well pulling us all towards, or lifting us up towards, whatever, that specific constellation. I'm not sure, but yeah, I definitely feel myself like I would be interested in it.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think my view on the matter is increasingly becoming this, that with respect to the accelerationist perspective, I think you really only do have a few choices, and it's either basically right accelerationism, Landian kind of maximal intelligence optimization, no matter how brutal, or you're basically nihilist and you're like, whatever, just whatever happens is fine, let go. I think that's the unconditional accelerationist perspective. I do tend to think that it, whether it likes it or not, is ultimately nihilist, I think. Or if you want to have any other view on the matter, any other more like ethically substantial view on the accelerationist question, your only option really is religion. Ultimately, I'm really starting to think that, and I'll just leave that as a provocation for now. But that's becoming my view.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of all that, you know, occasionally I just get these connections, as you do, kind of impressionistic in your mind. So, for instance, recently I thought of maybe there could be a connection, or you could kind of tease out a connection between unconditional accelerationism and Schelling's notion of the unconditioned, or das Unbedingte. I feel like there could be something there. And, you know, just in general, I feel like multiplying connections with regard, and multiplying just theories, you know, I think there's this, there's somewhat like of a danger, of course. There's always a danger of diluting it when you end up with, and obviously this is a problem, for instance, in Deleuze scholarship, where you have so much material on Deleuze. It's insane just the amount of material that's been published on Deleuze. I'm not saying like any of it's weak, but there is a danger of like almost coming back to the theme I mentioned at the beginning, this information overload pathology, where you just have so much almost like secondary material and not enough primary material on a specific issue. But I feel like with accelerationism, it doesn't really hold as much, because accelerationism to a certain extent is already secondary in nature. It's funny because, you know, what it's describing is the primary process. And then, as Lain says, any attempts to kind of theorize what capital wants, where it's heading, they're always going to be derivative or secondary in nature. And due to that, I feel like the proliferation of various narratives about accelerationism and about where we could be heading, or even, like I said, just mentioning now, Schelling's usage of the term unbedingt, which he contrasts to Hegel's notion, that could be fruitful. Like even just terminological questions like that, specifically in a subgenre of accelerationism now, it's unconditional accelerationism. But regardless, you know, things like that could be very fruitful.
For sure.
Those are just some things, yeah, just some like stray thoughts. And regarding your remarks about, you know, ethical nihilism, I wouldn't say it's like so much nihilism as it's indifference. And I feel like you know, it's not like an active nihilism. There is the Leotardian strain of accelerationism, which attempts to kind of accelerate, as he puts it in Driftworks, accelerate decadence, and destroy the belief in truth in all its forms. That's sort of like the avowedly nihilistic strand of accelerationism. And I mean, even Lyotard obviously condemned that phase of his writing, called, Libidinal Economy, his bad book and everything. So, but I would say in general, I wouldn't say it's nihilistic. It's just somewhat indifferent. It doesn't place priority on ethical questions. And to a certain extent, I just believe that I'm sure there's ways you could think of odd ways in which ethics could productively tie into accelerationism, but I believe it's primarily because there's a perception that ethical questions can and often do act as a decelerator. Especially preoccupation with ethical concerns can act as a decelerator. And therefore, there can be a tendency, especially among right accelerationists, towards a kind of hostility to ethics. I believe it's misplaced, but
yeah, I agree.
It's there. It is what
I mean, I think religions at their best can make ethics an accelerator. I kind of see religions as social technologies that are kind of almost designed to allow human beings to accelerate in some sense, but in a way that is ethically attractive. I mean, I find, for instance, the deep multiple layers in many of the world religions, but especially Catholicism, just because that's what I'm most familiar with. I find the deep layers of awareness about, the problems that will dominate us in the long run if we become, for instance, too, infatuated with technology. I mean, that's encoded all over the place in, the ethical teachings of Catholicism, for instance. I'm sure, also, other world religions. I think there's a deep awareness of precisely the accelerationist problematic developed initially in a pre-modern context, that pretty accurately describes what will happen if, we make this Faustian bargain with modern technology. In other words, I see religions as highly sophisticated social awareness of what's going to happen if modernity is allowed out of the cage. And then modernity is allowed out of the cage, and everything that we currently describe under the heading of accelerationism is precisely the catastrophes that were pretty much foretold in like early Christian ideas. I think there's a lot. I think one could easily show that in great detail. And so to me, that is quite that's quite a powerful and I think quite rational reason to, if you're interested in accelerationism, to suddenly start taking religion way more seriously.
Yeah, and just to comment on that, since it's fresh in my mind, having just read 1,000 Plateaus, you could tie it into the theme they bring up, specifically when they're talking about class or society against the state. When he's speaking of the kind of ways that primitive societies warded off the thing, which Deleuze and Guattari kind of refigure into capitalism, right? And you could almost see some of the religious strictures against certain practices, like usury, for instance, if you're talking about Catholicism, as also this kind of almost like a warding procedure, like a warding off. It's this defensive. Yep. This defensive mechanism. But obviously people like Lain, who doesn't want any deceleration, those sorts of the warding mechanisms in general, I feel like exploring those and seeing how those affected things, because I think, there's this tendency, especially in early Lain, I can't speak to what his opinion on it is now, to view negative feedback. It's very like it's very much a dichotomy. It's negative feedback and positive feedback, right? That's it. positive feedback good, negative feedback bad, right? And it's almost like just taking it literally, like negative equals bad and positive equals good, right? It's almost like it's obviously more nuanced than that, and more well thought out, like in the primary text where he does that is circuitries. But there's this tendency for that, and I think, as you were saying, there's like more nuanced ways to approach this warding, this warding off, this kind of decelerated perspective, and how that can actually contribute to acceleration. Something else also that Deleuze and Guattari mention, in kind of their pivot away from the kind of foot on the accelerator approach of anti-Oedipus, is that acceleration doesn't necessarily mean going fast. You can go slow. It can have fits and starts, right? It's never linear. To think of accelerationism or acceleration in a linear form, which I feel like, not naming any names, but a few people in the NRX or the right accelerationist sphere have done, and even to a certain extent certain left accelerationists have done, is severely misguided. And I think that's the major upshot and the major benefit of an approach like unconditional acceleration, although I don't align myself explicitly with it, is precisely this, at least this, trying to think of the right word, this making dubious the notion that there can be any sort of linear or easy to recognize form of acceleration, something that's easily indexable, right? And that's where you can critique left and right accelerationism, in that their indexes of what constitutes acceleration is far too blinkered, I suppose you could say, right? There's obviously the danger of, if you're not precise enough, then you'll lack all parsimony, and you'll just have this jumbled mess of a theory that doesn't have any traction whatsoever. But there's also this danger, that you'll end up defining the problem far too narrowly, and then you end up in a cul-de-sac, basically, which is what Deleuze and Guattari warn against. A black hole is what they call it. You'll end up disappearing into a black hole, or so. Right. Yeah, so I feel like this cautionary, it's kind of a paradox, because accelerationism, when you think of the term accelerationism, you immediately think of it's a kinetic metaphor. So you automatically think of, if you've ever driven a vehicle, just the accelerator, putting your foot on the accelerator as fast as just pressing down and not letting off and not hitting the brake, right? But that's maybe a detriment of the term. I think it's a necessary term, but it's a detriment of the term in that it immediately evokes the kinetic metaphor of this linear, progressive, teleological almost straight line. And I feel like the Deleuze and Guattari of 1,000 Plateaus, of the caution is cunning. Acceleration operates in fits and starts, slows down, speeds up, etc. Takes, to borrow a theme that Lain uses a lot from Austrian economics, the roundaboutness. It has this roundabout sort of direction, and it's somewhat oblique, and you can't simply say, well, this is definitely acting as a decelerator, and this is definitely acting as an accelerator.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously, I'm merely speculating here, and none of this is to be taken entirely seriously, but I believe that, personally, I would make that assertion.
No, I think that's all useful. You're just trying to think through what is actually a pretty complicated concept. You're trying to tease out some nuance, and that's hard to do. But I think you're right to point out these like difficult, thorny problems. I mean, I think that the most straightforward way to think about acceleration is to think about the long-term trajectory of technological development, over world history or something like that. I think that gives you like one scale, one kind of time series. And that's very straightforward to think about. That's basically, you know, like the singular,
right.
the
But how that's affected and how you can speed that up or slow it down is very counterintuitive. Let's put it that way.
Way more complicated.
It's not the way.
Yeah.
It's so describing, you know, describing what we mean by it is easy, but then actually trying to figure out that's kind of where anti-praxis comes in, is like trying to figure out how you would imaginably speed it up. In the case of left accelerationism, with like the, you know, their attempts to kind of evoke cybersyn as this way of doing it, like having this almost like quasi high modernist command and control idea of regulating capital and bringing it to the flow, like the flows, conjoining the flows in a way that increases techno-economic acceleration. I mean, it's certainly worth thinking about. It's not something you should dismiss offhand, but I just feel like it's far too clunky and retrograde a model to actually affect anything.
Yeah, I mean, if it didn't work the first time, you need a strong reason for why it didn't work the first time.
Which for them is obviously neoliberal intervention. Right?
So the one thing, I mean, I like what you're trying to do. I like how you're trying to kind of introduce some nuance into this idea of, you know, how exactly do human beings interact with, you know, accelerating processes? Because you're absolutely right to notice that it's actually way more complicated than many people want to take seriously, and you know, the ways that they use this sort of term or whatever. And one thing I would add to what you're saying is that it's, I think, a really crucial idea for people to realize is this idea of, I mean, you could call it different things, but I tend to think of it as, you know, the nested nature of systems, and, you know, that systems contain subsystems, right? And so, like, you can have accelerating processes in one level, in one, you know, at one level of a complex interdependent set of nested systems. You can have certain parts of it accelerating, and you can have other parts of it, you know, in, you know, negative feedback or whatever. You can have different things going on in different parts of the system. And also you can have multiple processes, you know, like in any kind of global process, you can have any number of local processes that start and end and maybe speed up or slow down. And I think the whole like Deleuzian, Guattarian kind of framework that they're trying to introduce is really trying, they're trying to, in a really creative way, give us a language for talking about this like very complex nature of systems, and how there are always multiple processes. And even when you're on one process, you know, that process can run out, or it can, you know, it can nosedive, or it can turn exponentially upward, or you can also just, you know, shift gears into a different process on a different, you know, line of flight or whatever. Like, it's an extremely, how we actually participate in accelerating technological dynamics is extremely fluid and supple thing. And I think the idea of nested systems is important, because what it means is that, like, any one unit, like a human organism, for instance, like our body, you know, we have to live, we have to be homeostatic. Like, everything in our bodies, if we're living, everything in our bodies is characterized by negative feedbacks. That's what stability is. Like, that's what survival of anything is, really tends to be. And so it's like, when our body inside of it, at one level of analysis, when there's exponential processes, when there's positive feedback, that usually is associated with death. You know, it's not like some sort of like glorious merging with the robots. It's just like cancer or something like that. Like, anything that takes off in an exponential way is the end of homeostasis, and it's basically like a collapse of the organism. It's not like something grand and sexy and exciting or anything. And so, but that's at one level of the organism. Like, that's at one level of the system. Like, my body is characterized by negative feedbacks, homeostasis, but maybe at the level of the social system, there are, in an abstract way, there are, you know, there's an exponential curve that my body is also being swept away on, is participating in, but the exponential curve, or the acceleration, is taking place at a higher aggregate level of analysis or something like that. And so you always have to, you know, for these terms of like negative feedback and positive feedback, to actually help you tell any particular kind of compelling story, you have to do a lot. You actually have to do quite a lot of legwork in distinguishing like what level of complex systems you're really trying to describe.
Right. And I think, you know, a funny thought just occurred to me when you're speaking about those things is like an interesting project would be, you know, just throwing it out there. I might approach it, or someone else listening to this live stream now or later can maybe, if they have special insight into this domain, they could look into it as, you know, maybe attempting to make some sort of Deleuzian slash Lumanian, because you're talking about social systems, so you could obviously bring Luhmann in and tie that into Deleuze, and the Deleuze and Guattari is problematic, especially of how do you become a body without organs, which is, of course, it's kind of like acceleration. There's always these like little crossovers you get. The body without organs is a lot like accelerationism in that it's an unfortunate term, because what it automatically brings to mind is not at all what it's trying to talk about, right? So in the case of the body without organs, it's the body without organism. That's the more correct way to understand of it. It's a body without organization, and not a body without organs. There can be every single organ in the human body could be exactly the same. It's just their organization, that is some sort of totalizing, unifying principle, is no longer operative. That's the important thing. And I feel like it's very similar to accelerationism, where the image that it evokes, the figure it evokes in one's mind when upon first hearing the term, is more so with the body without organs. It's like really misleading, but with accelerationism as well, it's somewhat misleading. And it brings this kind of, you know, all the standard things you hear about accelerationism, worse is better, you know, foot on the accelerator, you know, something that Deleuze and Guattari talk about in the concluding plateau of 1,000 plateaus, and that was talked about in a large thread in Twitter a couple months ago, as delio meters, which is basically measuring death. So delio, death, and then meters, you know, obvious, people know what a meter is. It's a way of measuring death, right? And that brings up, just, I brought it up because of your point of it, you know, it leads to cancer and leads to death, positive feedback. And they speak about that a lot too. And they categorize it in the concluding plateau under the term deliometer. So you can understand that that's one of the largest dangers for accelerationism. And it's feeds into Bracier's critique of land, is precisely this, first of all, co-option by forces larger than what we're describing, and then this tendency towards kind of total dissolution of the subject, which I don't think is the point of acceleration. It's the point of acceleration and of posthumanism and everything else, and I could be totally off base, is a refiguring. It's a total, wherein what we are describing as human, or as what, for instance, history previously understood, is completely refigured to it so as to be unrecognizable. So it's kind of like a death, but the thing that emerges from it is something. It's not a deliometer. It's not a black hole. It's not complete collapse with nothing coming after. So it's kind of like a generative death, I suppose you could say. So it's somewhat paradoxical in nature, and multiple things have been written about this, like Edmund Berger's considerations on death drive, and just Mark Fisher's considerations on death drive, and how at a certain point death and life become almost entirely equivocal terms, things like that. I'm just bringing things up now, obviously. Yeah. That I think of when I listen to what you had to say there.
Yeah, that was all really interesting. Those are useful wrinkles. Yeah. Do you feel like that was a nice little cap on that part of the discussion, or do you have anything else on that? I don't mean to be.
Yeah, just one last thing, and it's something I may write about in the foreseeable future. is I brought it up on Twitter a few times, and it's you know, just bringing it back somewhat to NRX, bringing it back to, you know, my influences, is the concept of pacifism. And pacifism is interesting because it's very, very similar to the concept of anti-praxis, which is central for unconditional accelerationism. It's very easy to mistake it for a kind of quietism. In the case of pacifism, another thing to mention for people who don't know, but it broke out in a kind of a large, as large as it can be in a small sub-community, genre like NRX. It broke out in a large dispute in the NRX community over this term pacifism. Some people just didn't like it at all and totally broke away with it. But it's a notion that Moldbug actually introduced a while back, and it was brought up again with regards to the Trump election because there was so much going on. And so the question of politics, which has always been important for NRX, obviously, came to the fore again, and kind of this idea of, well, what should we do? You know, should we support Trump? Should we support Clinton? There was all these, like, you know, musings back then, like supporting Clinton is more accelerationist. No, supporting Trump is more accelerationist because XYZ, which was fun. It was like, it's just a fun discussion to have and exciting. But anyways, back to the notion of pacifism. So pacifism is defined by Moldbug as the opposite of activism. And the reason why he recommends pacifism is because he basically goes out, he spins a narrative in which right-wing activism has always failed. Activism is a solely left-wing preoccupation. And therefore, he basically counsels pacifism, which is you basically gather up enough resources. I can't remember, there's like steps for it, but basically you become worthy of accepting some sort of leadership position in whatever the neo-Carroll patchwork city-state of the future, and you build up your resources and you kind of build a network. It's kind of clandestine network. So it's almost like it's funny, it's almost like Freemasonry. It's very similar to Freemasonry. You try to like influence politics in these subtle ways, and you just kind of accumulate wealth and power and prestige.
That's basically, by the way, what my YouTube strategy is.
The way you tie that into anti-praxis is kind of like a radicalized version of pacifism, in the sense that it's not counseling like, oh, right-wing activism never works, so let's never do activism. It's basically human activity in general is ineffective, is not non-effectual, especially organized. And you can see it almost as the answer, unconditional accelerationism's answer to left accelerationism, in that all these attempts at regulating or steering, the left accelerationists like to use Jameson's term, cognitive mapping, very often. And their point, anti-praxis's point, is simply that, sure, you can map all this, but then when it comes to the actual cybernetic work, cybernetic taking as steering or governing these processes, good luck with that. There's absolutely no way. And the way Berger justifies it, instead of focusing on right-wing activism, he focuses on I can't remember his first name, but it's complexity, social complexity or something. I'd have to revisit the piece. It's in his major piece on unconditional accelerationism and anti-praxis. But basically, Bar Yam's research indicates that social phenomena and anything that goes above the individual has become so complex that any attempt by conventional politics and conventional forms of activism have been almost entirely rendered ineffectual. And
yeah,
so that's something like I wanted to tease out and maybe like prod out like the deeper implications of that. And there's probably other angles that will occur to me later on when actually writing it. But yeah, that's something in terms of unconditional accelerationism, or even accelerationism more broadly, as a critique of right and left, but especially left, that maybe people haven't heard of before or not thought of before and could, you know, find interesting. So that's just like one of the last things I wanted to bring up with regards to accelerationism.
That's great. Yeah, that was a useful summary of that perspective for sure. Well done. I'm trying to think if there are any. I don't want to leave audience questions hanging too bad. Probably can't get to all of them, but see, there was one. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask on behalf of someone in the Discord server. What's your take on? Are you a fan of Goodreads as a platform? Like, are you? Someone wanted you to reflect on why you spend time on Goodreads or how you see it or whatever.
I spend time on it because it's, I don't know. I mean, in a sense, I like it just because you can catalog things. I'm not really as interested in it for the social aspect, but there's been people like, yeah, like Thomas Murphy on Twitter and things like that who've connected with me there and like commented on some of, like, when I post an update. Like, for instance, every time you like click on a book, I want to read it, or you post post a review of something or whatever, it shows up in your update feed just like Twitter. And so people can go in and say like, oh, you know, I've never, it's kind of interesting because people can actually see what you're reading and like, oh, I've never heard of that book before, or, you know, how, and they could even ask you, for instance, like, how does that tie in with your interests? Like, why would you want to read this book? And that's happened to me several times. And do you recommend this book? Like, or after they're done reading it, they'll ask me like, well, what are your critiques of this book? Where do you think this book was lacking? And I just feel like if you just read things and don't share, like, don't share anything about it, like no one knows. It's just like, people post on Twitter something like, I'm reading this, or post excerpts of books, which I've done before too. But I feel like Goodreads is more all inclusive, and it's more expansive, I suppose you could say. And I feel like it's definitely worth having an account there, even if, maybe just try it out, like add the books that you've read before, and you don't have to like spend too much time and categorize everything if you think it's a waste of time. But personally, like me, I'm an archivist. I'm an amateur archivist, obviously, so I like to categorize everything and have everything neat and clean. Maybe that's just part of the Teutonic, the Teutonic tendency as well, the neat and ordered kind of Gleichschaltung of everything. But yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely worth having an account, and it's nice. It lets people see what you're interested in and present feedback or ask questions. And I think almost all engagement to me is good engagement. Like
For sure.
publicity. There's no bad publicity.
For sure.
Except in extreme limit cases.
Have you ever thought about doing more on your YouTube related to like you actually saying stuff or making video stuff of you, like doing book reviews or commentary or anything on your YouTube? Have you thought about it, or not for you?
Yeah, I have. I just find, I don't know. I feel like if I wrote a script for it, I would be able to do it. Or if it's like an interview form, like you and me right now, whatever. But just, yeah. I find like the stream of consciousness, which is like the most prevalent form. So like sort of like video essays, something like video essays I might get into because I'm somewhat good at video editing. So I could do something like that, perhaps. But again, especially now, before when I was in university in Germany, which I studied philosophy, if maybe that was maybe up in the air, studied philosophy for about a year. That was the main focus. And
I try not to like drill people about their credentials because I don't want to seem like I'm like,
Oh, that's okay. I mean, it's just because Meta Nomad brought it up, so I thought I would too. It's not something that's incredibly important, but yeah. So back then, I obviously had a lot more free time. Now I'm working a full-time job at a tech company, so I try to read. I try to keep up to date with what's happening on Twitter, what's happening with the different people in the blogs, but actual like time to write video essays, for instance, and then video editing obviously extends the amount of time it would take. Yeah, it's a big time investment, and
sure.
At the moment, somewhat daunting, I suppose you could say.
Definitely. In fact, like one of the main reasons I've tried a bunch of things. Like I've had some free time in the summer since I'm an academic, but you know, like even in the summer I have a fair amount of stuff to do. In the semester, it's just forget about it. But so one of the reasons why I've kind of just tried a bunch of different things, and one of the reasons I've really kind of settled into these live streams is because they're really efficient. Because as soon as you're done, they go straight to the video archive. There's no editing, and it's just you can get a lot done. And yeah, it's not going to be perfect. Yeah, maybe you wish you said something differently, but if you just roll with it, it's really quite efficient. But yeah, I've done a few videos. I experimented with making videos, and they're fun, and it's cool to have more creative control and make things exactly how you want them to be. But man, are they time consuming to edit videos? Yeah.
Yeah, they're very time consuming. I mean, like I said at the beginning, with regards to making the audiobooks, and you know, anyone who has questions about that, just ask me like what programs I use, you know, my workflow. I'm definitely not versed to answering those kinds of questions. But it's time consuming. And in the case of the videos I produce, it's mostly not the videos that take time. It's just editing the actual text, as I said before. That takes a while, and it's also, as you said, it's kind of thankless work. It's like copy editing, you know, like you're just going through and you're just correcting mistakes that happen in translation. And so yeah, but I mean, I've gotten lots of people thank me, like people who have trouble. I've had a few people who have actually said it's helped them because they have trouble reading for long periods of time. Like they can only read like 10 minutes or 15 minutes at a time. They have some sort of condition, or I'm not sure. Sure. And it just helps them actually through the material, having that, you know. And yeah, obviously recording the audiobooks myself, it would be a huge time, you know, like I'd have to actually get paid money to do that, you know, people who get paid money to actually read audiobooks. Yeah.
Someone asked me to I've received a couple of requests to do audiobook, like actually read the book on YouTube.
I mean, articles maybe, but
audiobook, yeah. And I'm like, I'm not against the idea, but that doesn't sound very fun. Yeah, maybe go ahead.
Yeah, just maybe writing your own piece and then, you know, narrating your own piece is something. I'm trying to remember who did that. Someone did that where they it's probably something from NRX where someone would, you know, write their article and then maybe like a month later they'd post a actual like MP3 of them reading aloud their article that they posted a month ago.
That's cool.
Something like that, you know, just so they know.
Yeah, that makes a little bit more sense because, you know, you wrote it, so to put it in your voice kind of is natural enough, and you know, you want to share your ideas, so you just you express them in a different form. Like that's, you know, motivating and edifying. But just doing like any random book that you want to turn into an audiobook, it's a pretty mercenary task.
Right, I know. Yeah,
so okay, I mean, we're coming up on we've now crossed 2.5 hours for me. We don't need to like wrap it up in any rush or anything, but I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. Was there anything you want to share? Anything else you had on your mind you definitely wanted to introduce to the conversation? Not
exactly anything definite, but just, you know, were there any other like audience questions?
There might have been a few that maybe got lost in the chat, but we definitely did a good job answering most of them. Yeah, so, you know, like you said, if people wanted to reach out to you, you seem open to that. But I think, I don't think, I mean, I think we answered most of the questions. There might have been a few left out, but you can never get all of them. So I'm just taking a quick look. Nothing's jumping out.
Obviously, if you had any other questions or just like reflections on what we've talked about so far, if we, you know, we can try to like do a wrap up, you know, like tie a nice bow around things.
Sure. Well, you know, I mean, I feel like these themes that we're all interested in, there's so many of them, and it's such a kind of vast web of ideas and concepts and themes and possible talking points that, you know, the idea of getting any kind of like satisfying closure out of what is really just a kind of, you know, chit chat for the first time, like people who have never talked before, just kind of feeling each other out and understanding each other's perspectives. Like it's mostly, you know, we just kick up whatever we feel like kicking up, and once we run out of steam, kind of wrap it up. But I think for the most part, these don't usually end with any kind of like grand,
Yeah, there's no,
especially satisfying like theoretical closure of any kind. So
Mhm.
sometimes what I do is I ask like, is there anything, on your agenda for the near future that you want to share, like things you want to work on or things that we might look out for coming up on your end, also to kind of give my guests like an opportunity to, if you want to plug anything or whatever, that kind of thing. And I'm just curious, yeah, like what's next for you? Like, what are you working on and stuff like that?
Sure. So I wanted to do an audiobook of libidinal economy because I think it's really important. But there's like kind of a very similar issue with Klosowski's book, which I eventually did get around to. It was just it was a major task. It took me probably, I would say, five times more time to finish Klosowski's book on Nietzsche than it did almost any other project. And for some reason, libidinal economy, the PDF I have of it is actually really nice condition, but when I try, maybe there's just too many French words in it, too many like strange terms, like he uses the term cathexis quite often. And I don't know what it is, but trying to like, I won't bore you with the technical details, but just trying to translate it and then get it working with the reader is somewhat difficult. So I think
if there was a way that you could basically like crowdfund the project per project, like if there was something that people really wanted an audiobook of and you got the money in advance, then you could outsource these things, like you could pay someone on some freelance site to convert the PDF to clean text, and and then do.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just thinking like,
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just going back to stuff, it's libidinal economy is like on the slate, but like how long it'll take me to get it, like actually finish it, who knows? But definitely things I'm going to do in the near future. After Finitude. So Quentin Mesu's book that Ray Brassi translated into English. I'm going to do that. I was pretty interested in speculative realism for a while as well. So, that would be way too big of a rabbit hole now to go down. But particularly like Mesu's stuff and Pete Wolfendale's writings, especially. I think he's a genius, and I really hope him and Reza really and Bryce as well in that realm of things like ontology and epistemology. They're really at the forefront. So after Finitude, more of Deleuze's writings. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to do Difference in Repetition next. That just seems to me to be incredibly important. That's his central text. Most Deleuze scholars agree that of all of his texts, that's the one that is, you could say, I mean, obviously he doesn't like to use terms of like priority and things like that, but I think as far as how much it's referenced and concepts are used, like that's one of the things that I really had trouble with when reading Anti-Oedipus, is a lot of the terminology and a lot of the explanation of the terminology for terms in Anti-Oedipus. They're explained briefly, but a lot of them are in Difference in Repetition. And I had to kind of go back while I was reading and like read the definitions of those terms. So Difference in Repetition, definitely. Probably Logic of Sense, which is also incredibly important book by him. And then I actually wanted to do more Sloterdijk. I really like Sloterdijk.
I'm a huge fan.
My favorite.
That's something.
He's probably my favorite contemporary German writer.
That's something we have in common. Then that's interesting. Yeah,
he's great. I absolutely enjoy his texts. And I just feel like every time he says something, there's something to be gleaned from it, which is unique. And there's interviews with him where you see his house and just like all the walls are just bookshelves. So many. It's just bookshelves upon bookshelves. And I've read the first volume of his Spherology, his trilogy, his big project, but I haven't found the time yet to dig through the latter two volumes. yeah, he's incredible. He's definitely up there with Heidegger for me as far in terms of German writers.
Yeah,
And then
I read the Critique of Cynical Reason. And I was blown away by it. I thought it was really, really cool, impressive work.
yeah, and then maybe some more Schmidt, specifically political romanticism. Political romanticism is a really important text of Schmidt's. Simulation and Simulacra, so some Baudrillard.
Cool.
And I was thinking also of doing some Koselleck because Vincent's been talking about him very much. He's like I don't know if you know of him, know about him. He's a really influential German intellectual historian. His large topic, his theme is the palingenesis of modernity. So kind of like how is modernity generated? And his major book is Crisis and Critique. It's published by MIT, I think something about 20 years ago, but it's a really good book and really important. I think it's actually very important in terms of accelerationism because of the amount of time he devotes to questions of temporality, which is obviously a very important theme, templexity and all that in Lain's writings. Yeah, so, and then let's see, I'll just mention one more thing.
A hearty agenda.
Right. Someone mentioned they wanted a John Michael Greer book, maybe, so I'll probably do one of those. I'm open to requests. Like, I have a lot of my plate. I have a lot of like a list of things that I'm going to do, but I'll definitely, if I also have interest in it, and I do have interest in Greer's work, then I'll definitely get around to it someday in the near future.
I think there's just one final question, which Alice Farmer, who is on acid while she's watching this, insists that we answer, which is are traps accelerationist?
Ooh, so that's the like gotcha question. That's like, hey, damned if you do, damned if you don't answer it. One or the other. You're gonna
like trap queens.
No, like traps. Basically, men who look feminine enough that you mistake them as the opposite sex.
Oh, okay. I thought a trap was like trap house is like making crack and stuff.
No. I don't think so. Because she didn't say is trap accelerationist. She said are traps. So when you say traps, I mean, I would say, this occurred to me. You could bring in Benedict Singleton's analysis of traps in the Accelerationist Reader. If you wanted to, you could spin off a whole essay about that, relating the two. But I definitely think, I mean, if Meltdown, if we just take Meltdown as the example, then yes, transsexualism, whatever you want to plug into it, xenofeminism, and Meltdown, it's the what's the term? HIV plus, HIV plus Latinx hooker with implanted mirror shades. So I mean, that's not exactly a trap, because that's a bit too on the nose. It's not subtle enough to be a trap, but I would say generally, yes, Preciado, transgenderism, do-it-yourself biology, hacking your biology, it's definitely something that can be an accelerator, let's put it that way. So it's definitely something that will accelerate the process.
I think Nick's Land would definitely say that traps are accelerationist.
I should have brought up Nick's. Yeah, definitely.
Also, I talked last night with Sonia Mann. We talked about Pink Pill a bit. So
right.
I don't know what their take on traps.
It's funny you mentioned Pink Pill stuff, because that was a big Frog Twitter thing for a while. Mini Mod on Twitter, that was her. Well, I think it still is her brand. But that was a big thing back then, was the pink pilling, and that was a meme for a while. It's not as much as one, but it still has some traction. People recognize it when you say it.
Very strange. Very strange. Well, I think with that question, we've definitely made as valiant an effort as possible to address all audience questions. If we missed a few,
we made it to the height of our discourse.
Yeah,
we've reached the zenith.
Basically, but we covered a lot of ground. So thank you so much for not only agreeing to chat with me, even though we don't know each other, but talk for, more than 2 hours about lots of interesting stuff. So thank you for your contribution here.
Of course, and I just have to thank you because, as you might have experienced on Twitter, badgering you about the land interview, there's not a lot of people that do this sort of thing. I think it's either reckless or brave. I would like to tend towards the latter, that you're even approaching subjects and thinkers who might be somewhat, could be seen as hazardous to one's career. Like we talked about earlier with the New Center, that was definitely eventually the case for them. They couldn't deal with it anymore. So, right. But I think, when you actually get to talk to people like Land or Storm King, for instance, these kinds of people, they're quite affable people. And, whenever you think of Land as some sort of monster, just think that he has 2 kids and that he once, burnt popcorn, tried to make popcorn for them and burnt it into a necrotic ooze, I think was the term he used to describe it, and horrified the children or something. So, he's not someone who's some hard-nosed, I don't think he's someone who harbors hatred of any kind. I think he finds even the mere concept of hatred, except in the kind of philosophical Bataillean sense, I think is just repugnant or even just beneath his consideration. So yeah, that's all I would say. I would say I really commend what you've been doing and just your efforts in this domain. And yeah,
thanks, man. I appreciate that a lot. I have to say. Yeah, that means a lot to me. Yeah, I mean, I think like I just decided at a certain point that I'm just gonna stop calculating strategically about my like role in, not like altogether. Obviously, I have projects within the cathedral kind of systems that I'm continuing to push forward, but that I'm going to basically on the internet say whatever I want, do whatever I want, and just let the chips fall where they may. And I kind of just like put blinders up to the risks and what could happen, and I just kind of like basically just pushing outward as hard and fast as I can. And I guess I just believe that like it'll work somehow. Like, yeah, I don't know.
I don't think it will. I think it's good as just an example. It's similar to what Lain said about his kind of anecdotal experiment regarding the cathedral, where he was kind of I guess you could say like poking at the dragon. He was trying to goad the cathedral. I don't know. I mean, it's not slumbering, but I suppose you could use that metaphor if you'd like. And just putting your neck on the line and whatever, if you want to use a more prosaic term, having skin in the game, to borrow Talib's metaphor, it's something that it's admirable, and it will set a precedent. People who academics in the future who want to actively engage with these sorts of things. And there's more and more people doing it. There's that guy, his name, I think Stephen Overy, he wrote his thesis actually 2 years ago on land. Things like that, just people giving talks at like academic conferences about accelerationism. I know, I'm pretty sure Garton hinted that he gave a talk on the CCRU at Cambridge. People just willing to take these things seriously, not treat them as take them seriously, but in a playfully inflected sort of manner. Not like dead serious, but serious enough to where you treat it with a sort of respect that doesn't approach reverence, I suppose you could say.
That's a healthy attitude. I mean, one thing I've thought a lot about as I've been doing this is that my view is sort of that the cathedral's mechanisms are fairly transparent and they're fairly predictable, I think. And so it's like, I'm of the opinion, I kind of am working what I consider to be a kind of bimodal strategy or a kind of bidirectional hypothesis, which is basically that I'm just going to do whatever I want. And it's either going to be so weird and fringe that people aren't going to even really notice or care because it's just minor. It's minor in the scheme of things. And it just sneaks under the radar from being so strange and weird and unintelligible mostly to like cathedral types.
It's certainly minoritarian in the Deleuze and Guattarian sense.
I think so. I think so. And so that would be one possibility, is like it just goes completely under the radar because it's so minoritarian and fringe and unintelligible to cathedral, my cathedral overlords. Or, if they try to, lock me down, or if the cathedral responds in its kind of typical paranoiac, overreactive way, and I start getting, like repressive measures, or God forbid, some sort of like major scandal type thing were to occur, well, then I've seen this play out enough times in the past to know what that's going to look like and know what to expect. And basically, right. I think that I've set things up well enough at this point. I've been strategic enough that if that were to happen, then I would just live stream the whole thing, and I would make like a whole big offensive about it. Like I've kind of had this dream actually in some sense. Like I'm not corny. Like I'm not trying to provoke it to do this necessarily. I would much prefer to just have like a quiet life and be left alone to do my creative stuff. But given like the situation we're in, obviously there are serious risks. Obviously people can have their entire careers and livelihoods like smashed from some like strange accusation that doesn't even make any sense. So obviously I'm not stupid. I've been, careful to prepare for this. And I've been thinking about it for a while, and I've been building these like platforms in a strategic way such that if that happens, I think like what I would love to do is be one of the first like cathedral dwellers who, when encountering this type of like crazed, paranoiac, repressive response to what I say or do, I'd like to try to be one of the first people who are like one step ahead of it and actually turn that incidence into like a massive crisis for the cathedral. Like I have these like visions, these like dream fantasies of like being called into the dean's office at my university to be, no, seriously, listen to this. Like I have this like dream fantasy of the dean calls me in to reprimand me for some bad thing I did on the internet. And, little does she know, I walk into the office with my iPhone live streaming, like that type of
it's
thing.
Like Fight Club.
Yeah. And I
walk into the office, start like punching yourself.
How awesome would that be? Like how incredibly entertaining and interesting would that be if like the cathedral basically tried to fuck me over, and I could kind of represent one of the first efforts to really in a forward thinking way, like outgame the cathedral from the very beginning of that contest. Like I've been thinking about these things like pretty hard. So I think that's one reason why I'm confident and I'm not too worried about the risks, because I feel like, I'm happy to go to war if I need to, if I need to go to war to like say what I think and do what I want. Like I'm at a point in my life where I'm game for that.
All right. Well, best of luck,
But thank you for your kind words. I was just taking it as an opportunity to share my like strategizing a little bit, because I think it's interesting.
Of course.
Yeah. So, all right, man. Thanks again. Thanks once again. Yeah. This was really cool, and we'll be in touch, of course.
Yeah.
All right, dude.
Definitely down to do another one of these in whatever 6 months or next summer.
Okay,
whenever
that's
you
good
have.
Really
because you'll probably be quite busy during the school year, and I'm also working a full-time job. So, but whenever things work out again, definitely a game for another, and maybe I'll have actually published something that's somewhat original by then.
That's really good to know that you'd be down to do it again. Because like it's always, if I do keep going hardcore with all of this, like it'll always be useful to have people come on a second or third time, because you're always looking for guests. So I'll keep that in mind. So you enjoyed yourself, did you?
Yeah, of course. It's been quite some time since I've done something like this, but you always get yourself worked up. What if I say the wrong thing? Am I going to look? I'm going to look bad, tarnish my reputation. But it's not a high risk, and it's certainly worth the risk, and it's enjoyable. So yeah.
Awesome, dude. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it too. So all right, I'll let you go now, and we'll be in touch. Friedrich, talk to you later, man.
Auf Wiedersehen.
See you, dude. All right. That was good. Another good one. That was long. I just hit the 3-hour mark. I'm pretty fried. I'm checking the chat now after my little rant. Yeah, the accusation that's going to put me over the top is my crack habit. Well, it's funny you say that, Alice, because actually, I've actually only been officially reprimanded a couple times so far. And the first one, the main one that I was reprimanded for the first time, was when I put video online of me doing psychedelics. I did mushrooms in Amsterdam and made like Instagram videos of me on drugs. And students, the reason is that students saw them and they thought, as students obviously would, the students thought that was very funny. And I mean, they probably thought it was cool because I'm fucking cool. What can I say? But there was gossip about it and that bubbled up. And basically, universities get really paranoid about anything that could be about like student liability. So their fear is like, oh my God, one of our kids is going to do drugs and die, and they're going to blame it on Justin or something like that. So I got reprimanded for putting video of me doing drugs, but most of the other stuff, like, I've never really been reprimanded, with the one exception of the ethics complaint about my blog post about Kekistan. I'll tell that story at a later date. I'm waiting to see what happens with it, actually. They're like, the ethics board is like doing a review of my case. But again, like, I'm not intimidated, because if they want to give me shit for something really stupid, I'll literally just rock up with my phone live streaming, and it'll be hilarious and fun. So, all right, folks. I hope you enjoyed that one. I'm pretty fried. 3 hours of talking is a lot. So everyone say good night to me and to each other. Good night, everyone. And we'll wrap it up. I'll give you all a minute to say good night to each other. We have to do like post stream bonding and goodbyes. Jim Johnson says Justin's GoFundMe for his lawsuit costs is already up. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is what I was saying before earlier in the chat, like, no lie. I'm not like going very hard on trying to get money from anyone at this point right now, but I'm definitely thinking hard about like having that prepared in case, God forbid, I were to like lose my job all of a sudden. If people wanted me to keep doing this, I would have to at some point ask for money. So I'm definitely planning like how I would do that if I needed to, for sure. Good night, Marco. Good night, streamer. Good night, UTSB. Good night, Fnargle. Good night, Alice. Yeah, that's right, Alice. J Murph taking the cathedral down one live stream at a time. That's what's up. No, obviously I don't have any such, overly grandiose notions, but I do think that, everyone can play their part in, taking down stupid, oppressive, dominant structures just by being, extra militantly creative and honest and taking small risks. Everyone can do that, and it adds up. I think that's legit. All right, Strawberry, good night. IVRF, good night. Alice, you've been giving me a lot of trolling this evening, I think, but that's okay. We're buds. It's all good. You're on acid, so all is forgiven. Good night, Alice. Good night, Nightbot. Good night, Jim Johnston. Good night, Davez. Good night, Callum Blake. Good night, Space Explorer. Good night, Marco. Did I say you yet? Good night, Antoine. Good night, Edmund. Good night, Tracy. Good night, Kruska. Good night, Oswald Spengler. Should I do this? Should this be a tradition after every single live stream? I say good night to every single person in the chat. Good night, Marco. There's a third. I mean, if y'all are not in a rush to go, if you have nothing to do on this lovely Saturday night, I can leave this open while I do some shit real quick. What I need to do is text my friend who I might be meeting up with. But you can chat with me if you want. What I want to do, here's a little sneak peek of one thing I want to do is get a bunch of people who did my stream in the past and get them all in one big Google Hangout. I think that'd be fun. Yeah, Friedrich, I'll do like a family reunion hangout at some point, and I'll get a bunch of people who I've talked with all in the same hangout together. That'd be pretty dope, I think. And yeah, stay tuned because in the next hangouts at some point, I'm gonna get my technical systems hooked up right, and I want to make these really dope where it's like you can see my face and you can see their face, and we can also have music playing with the DJ bot and also have like cool pop-ups and stuff. I'll get it sorted. It'll be dope. Don't you worry. Okay. I'm going to be right back. Actually, maybe I can play music somehow through the, I can do it through the microphone. I'll turn this on. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, but we'll find out. I need to get water. My throat is parched as frick. Yeah, if you guys have other things to do, go do them. If you have friends, IRL, in meet space that you have to see, go see them. But if you got nothing to do and you're just chilling on the internet, I'll hang out for a little bit more. I just won't do that much talking, but I'll chime in here and there. I'll try to play some music though. Get Robin a DJ. I need to make like I'll make the DJ bot. I'll name it like Robin McKay or something. I'll be right back. I just need to get some water. Who's next on the list? I'll tell you when I get back.
Circuits on, flex capacitor, flexing, engine running, right.
So, can you hear that music? Oh man, Strawberry Letter and Alice are about to throw down fisticuffs over dirty projectors. All right, I'm texting with my Meat Space friends to see if I might go out. Viewer retention is legit. 28 of you. You're really down for the struggle. Now I know who my true friends are. What do you think about what if I did like one of those long-term live stream things where I just had like 2 cameras in my house live streaming at all times? Would that be cool? Would you watch that? Just like, what if I just did normal stuff like cooking and cleaning and writing and reading, like what I usually do? Strawberry, what do you mean by get ready with me crowd? What's the get ready with me crowd? I don't know what that is. I'm an idiot. Friedrich was cool. It's interesting how like a few of the people I've talked with were like pretty young, like maybe younger than I would have expected. Maybe I would say he's an example. Also, I didn't realize Meta Nomad was like so young either. That's cool though. It means, you know, the youth are rising up. Am I still in the youth or not? I don't know. I guess not. Makeup artists, DIY craft. Makeup artists, DIY crafts, subculture gossip type figures. Okay. Only 24-year-olds think that 24 is old. Ooh, Davez, tell me what on earth is a mukbang stream? Oh, by the way, Alice, I used to be a huge fan of Dirty Projectors. I haven't listened to them in a while, but I liked them when I did listen to them a lot. What I'm kind of thinking about is like, I would eat on camera. Mukbang. Why do they call it mukbang? Rather strange. I could do that. That sounds fun. Easy. Okay. Would you guys like that? Would you like if I ate dinner on the stream every night? Oh, Friedrich wants in the Discord, so I'll give him the link. I would do that. Yeah, I'm psyched for the Discord too. It's been really thriving, I think. Although, do you folks agree with me that I feel like last night when I made the offer of the link in the YouTube video, the people who came in, I no beef with them. They didn't do anything bad, but they just seemed kind of like low effort. Like their introductions were really short, and it just seemed like they wanted to just kind of see what was going on. And they're probably members of like a million Discords. And yeah, so I'm going to be a little bit more coy about giving invitations, I think. Yeah, I'm going to work on the audio. I'm going to get it all set up. Real nice. What are you people doing anyway? Like, what time is it where you live, and what part of the day are you in, and what's going on? Do you just have this up in the background while you're like painting and doing stuff like that, or what? Oh, you're in Rio, Marco? Like Rio de Janeiro? Alice, it's 8 a.m. Man, that's so cool to think about how we're in different time zones. Kreska's painting. Marcus practicing Mozart. Wow, you're all a bunch of fucking genius artists. That's pretty sweet. Strawberry Letters probably painting or drawing too. That's cool. And I'm just sitting here texting people. It's in danger of smiling over you. Yeah. When you look at things too long, they do eventually, there does emerge a danger of them smiling back at you. You know what I was thinking would be dope if like, if I had mad money and I could like fly interesting internet people out to me to join me in person, and then I had this like sweet room with like a big table, and you could actually see what people are like in person. Random people on the internet. It'd be so funny. Yeah, it's Saturday night, but it's already 11:20 here. I don't really go out, on weekend nights, except for like a drink with a buddy or something like that. I don't like go out properly. Why Bronze Age pervert out? Yeah, Bronze Age pervert could afford to pay his own way with his massive book sales. Yeah, BAP has had me blocked from like before I even found out about BAP. Like as soon as I looked up BAP, I was blocked. So I don't know what's up with that. I never did anything, Tim. That's fascinating that he lives in Rio. How do you know that, Marco? Easy to zone out to people talking about acceleration. What are you trying to say? Oh, tell you about my buddy. My buddy Jonathan Havercroft. He is a political theorist. He's like a little bit above me in the academic hierarchy. He's a associate professor in my department, but he's a real cool dude, really down to earth and funny dude. And he's like a Buddhist, and he doesn't give a fuck about cathedral stuff. He's like a lefty, but he's very open-minded and just kind of funny guy, and he accepts me for who I am. We're good buddies. It's one of my main like drinking buddy kind of hangout dudes in Southampton. Also, he's pretty friendly. He's pretty internet friendly. Like I've actually done streams back when I was first playing around with them ever. And he's like, he doesn't mind being in them. So if I get more hardcore about streaming, you'll probably see him. Oh shit. I just turned on the stream for a second. Oh, interesting. So Marco, you can tell from the pictures he posts that they seem to be from Rio. Wow. That's pretty fascinating. I heard he's like super sensitive about that stuff, like being doxxed. What do we talk about together? What do I and Jonathan talk about? Mostly our. I was gonna make a bad joke. You know, like relatively inane things: politics, academic, career bullshit, department gossip. It's like, you know, when you have. He's a good buddy of mine and a genuine good friend. But we're coworkers, you know, so it's like one of those things where when you have a friend who through work, a lot of the conversation usually revolves around, you know, office gossip and academic career stuff. Am I interested in visiting Shanghai or Singapore? Hell yeah, I am. I haven't been to Asia like at all, really. So I'm trying. I would love to go as soon as I can. It's just expensive to get out there. What I would like to do is get like some sort of invitation from a university to like give a lecture or whatever, anything that could pay for itself for me to go over there. Yeah, definitely. Why do you ask, IV? Do you have some way to get me to Shanghai or Singapore? I would be very interested to learn more about that. Strawberry letter. I like how you put check marks after things. Good description. Check. Did that answer your question though? Nothing too interesting. I mean, but he's open-minded, so we talk about. I'm pretty honest. I'm a very like forthright person. I tend to overshare a lot, and so I usually only become friends with people who are cool with me doing that. All right, yeah, in a little bit, I'll go to the pub. Jimmer crack habit. Confront Nick Land with the live stream camera outside of his residence. Bap is a lady and strawberry letter is cocky duty. That's a theory. I like how strawberry letter and Alice Farmer are becoming besties in the chat. I hope that my live stream over the course of its duration will become the home of many new besties. That would make me happy. Can't get a follow back from Cocky Duty? I could get you the follow back from Cocky Duty. I bet you. Are there any more well-known individuals you hope to interview in the future? Yeah, there's so many people I'd be happy to talk with. The world is so massive. Yeah, there's a long list of super interesting people that I'm intrigued by or fascinated by or admire or whatever, just would like to hang out with. So yeah, that list is infinitely long. What I'm kind of doing is slowly building things up. You know, so like the more, you know, it's sort of obvious, but the bigger your audience is, the more you can kind of tempt more famous people to give you some of their time. And so it's a pretty like predictable kind of status competition ladder thing that you have to kind of climb, I think, you know. But you know, you just basically send out a lot of emails all the time, and most of them reject, but some of them will accept. And then over time, you can get, you know, bigger and bigger people or whatever. But what's so cool about what I'm doing right now, anyway, is like I'm not really oriented upward in terms of like status. I'm like really interested in like lateral. Like I'm interested in the people already around me, who I've seen for a while, who I'm more or less kind of like moving around and just kind of asking them for now while I'm kind of like learning how to do these things in the best way possible. What are the odds of me getting Jordan Peterson in for a 2-hour chat? Well, I've interacted with him in like a little bit online, and he's retweeted me like 2 times, and I know that I did some data analysis of his followers, and I know that that was like at the top of the Jordan Peterson subreddit for a while, and I know that his son monitors the Jordan Peterson subreddit and tells Jordan about like the stuff that's like important there or whatever. So the fact that he's retweeted me twice, I'm pretty sure like I'm on Jordan Peterson's radar, but like the dude is so busy that I wouldn't even want to ask him to do anything because he's just, I'm afraid the poor guy's going to like keel over one day just from doing so many talks and whatever. I invited Adorno, Fagin, also known as Schwunform. We're friendly online. We've talked for ages. Of course he could come on whenever he wants, but I don't think this is his kind of thing. It's not his style, not his aesthetic. IV, RF, you're from SEA, though not from Singapore. Do you have any connections at universities or corporations or nonprofits that can pay for an academic to give a lecture? Because if so, I'm your man. But actually, while I'm waiting here for my buddy, hang on. Okay, I'm going to go hang out with my buddy, but I'm going to give you one big piece of secret information before I do that. Since you all are clearly my hardcore best buddies on the internet. Marco, you were asking me what's the odds of me getting someone like Jordan Peterson or whatever. What I would say is that like I'm kind of basically, how do I put this? Like I'm having fun just kind of talking with whoever is around me, whoever I want to talk with right now. That's kind of what I'm doing because it's fun, and I think it's good to like create time and space for people, even if they're, you know, not like famous or whatever. I think that's worth doing for its own sake, and that's why I'm doing it. I think there's a lot of value hiding in, you know, like laterally around me. But I'm definitely, you know, if I'm going to do this sort of stuff more and more seriously, then obviously it would be natural to try to over time get, you know, higher profile people. So I've definitely obviously been thinking about that. And I'm not sure how exactly it's all going to pan out, but there's definitely like I have a long list of people who I'm pretty friendly with who are like semi-famous, and probably at a certain point I will like if I decide to take all this stuff to the next level, then I will kind of start sending out emails more ambitiously. And there's like a good handful of people that are pretty famous who I'm more or less in touch with, and I know they kind of follow me and respect me. So I'm pretty sure that like when the time is right, I could start getting much higher profile guests. But I think I'm just kind of taking my time because honestly, like if and when that, like once I do that, I don't know, like you never know. Like if this stuff were to like take off and I started getting lots of YouTube subscribers or something, then I'd have to really focus on it. I'd have to follow through on it, you know, and make that worthwhile. So right now I'm, it's not that I'm prepping hard for it. It's just that I'm a systematic person and I think a lot about options and how to play things and the different possible pathways through which things could happen, and what's, you know, I just think about like what's the best way to layer my options and prioritize things or whatever. So the secret thing I wanted to could be Daviz. Yeah, I'm not sure. The thing I wanted to share with you real quick, for those of you who are still with me, just a little bit of personal news, which is kind of exciting. And I haven't shared this with anyone else. I have been pitching a book. I might have mentioned this, I think, a few times in the previous chats. And it's like a mainstream kind of like aims to be like a, you know, a splashy kind of like popular book about politics. And I've been like trying to shop it to literary agents. So I've been sending out emails. You know, you send out query emails basically, seeing if agents would be interested in it. And I sent out like dozens probably. And I finally got an agent who wants to represent the book and me. So that's pretty exciting. I actually just talked with him yesterday. And if I don't hear back from other people who also, you know, seem interesting and like that I'd like to work with, so far of all the people I've chatted with, he seems like the best bet. He really gets me, and I think gets the idea of the book and really likes it. And he's like, this is like a major agent. It's like a major New York agent. Like the agent himself has a Wikipedia page. He's like pretty legit. And so, yeah, who knows what will happen with it, but he basically like wants me, and he offered to represent me. So, yeah, I might, and it looks like most likely I'll end up signing with this guy, and then I'll have officially a literary agent, and then he'll be trying to sell my book to like big publishers. So you never know how these things are going to pan out, but it's definitely a super exciting thing for me because I've been trying to like, you know, write this book for a while. So it's very, very exciting for me. I didn't want to share this like at the beginning of the chat with, you know, because I don't know, you know, you don't want to jinx things, you know, but I figure here we are. You folks are hanging with me to the bitter end after almost 4 hours of hanging. So you're my internet besties, essentially. So I can tell you top secret shit. So thank you for the well wishes and the congrats. Yeah, I'm so pumped. I'm completely very excited. It could be like, I mean, like I said, you never know, and you can't count your chickens before they hatch, but it could be a huge break. Yeah, so I'll keep you posted on all of that, as always. All right. Some random may have just turned in now. Yeah, you never know. You never know, like when someone just retweeted it or whatever, but it's all good. Hell yeah, Marco, that's right. Well, if I get a major book deal and that all takes off like crazy, I'll remember you people. My first hardcore 28 viewers of my live stream. I'll remember you. And don't worry. I'll never forget where I came from. All right, gang. Thanks for hanging with me. I hope you enjoyed this one tonight. I thought it was pretty good. Yeah. I'm sweating profusely. OGs. That's right. Y'all are my OGs. All right. I'm going to go have drinks with my friends. Take it easy, everyone. I wish you the best. Whatever you're doing, I hope you're enjoying it. I hope it goes well. Take care of yourselves. And don't do anything I wouldn't do. I will see you all soon. Someone asked me when is the next live stream. I don't know. I have a bunch of people I'm planning ones with. So there'll definitely be plenty of live streams over the next few weeks. So just stay posted for the next one. I'll post links as I always do. All right, everyone. Thanks for hanging, as always. Later. Bye-bye. We already said byes, so. All right. No, you go first. Later.